Chapter 158. Prince Longqing remembered who Ning Ke was. He had lived a brilliant life and rarely had the opportunity to be humiliated. But last time in the Victory House, the academy student in front of him and his little handmaiden had humiliated him twice in a row. At least in his eyes, it was a humiliation, so he could not forget them. Because of his disgust, he asked his subordinates to investigate Ning Quebec. However, the result of the investigation disappointed him. This student from the academy was indeed a useless person who only knew how to talk. He could not cultivate and could not be his opponent. Since he was not qualified to be his opponent, he thought that there was no need to remember such a person. Before going up the stairs today, Prince Longqing had imagined what kind of competitors he might meet. For example, the young monk who obviously came from the unknown place, or the young swordsman from the South Jin Kingdom. He even thought that the academy might have hidden a backup, but he never thought that the person who broke out of the fog behind him was Ning Quebec. He looked at Ning Ke's face silently and smiled mysteriously. Ning Ke saw that he had no intention to eat the pastries, so he took back his hand and said with a smile, "Don't be too surprised, it's not an illusion." At this moment, 2 pieces of emerald green bamboo floated slowly under the starlight and floated in front of them as if they were alive. The voice of the Academy's second brother sounded again from under the tree. "The hard stone at the end of the mountain path is the top of the mountain. Whoever climbs up first can enter the second floor of the Academy. But I have to remind you that the short stone steps are more difficult than all the tests you have experienced before. If you force yourself, it is very likely to cause irreversible damage to your body and spirit. Hold the 2 pieces of green bamboo in your hands. If you feel that you can't hold it, you can pinch it." Prince Longqing and Ning Ke bowed to the tree and reached out to take the green bamboo pieces from the air. Then they walked forward. They walked side by side. Prince Longqing did not show any expression on his face and did not speed up his pace. He let Ning Ke walk beside him while chewing the pastries, which meant that he admitted that he was qualified to walk side by side with him. "Actually, I envy you very much." Ning Ke looked at the prince's perfect side profile and wiped the pastry crumbs on his hand onto his clothes. He shrugged and said, "You are born into a good family, have good talent, and have a good life. You also have a partner that everyone envies. For someone like me who comes from a terrible background, has terrible talent, and has an extremely bad fate, and only has a little charcoal head by my side, it's really too hard for me to reach your level." When the 2 walked to the bottom of the boulder and stood in front of 2 steep and narrow paths, Prince Longqing suddenly turned to look at him and said calmly, "You have surprised me a lot. If I had known this, I wouldn't have waited for you." After saying this, Prince Longqing did not hesitate at all. He lifted the front hem of his robe and stepped on the stone path. Ning Ke stared blankly at the entrance of the stone path, and his heart was in turmoil. As someone who had struggled at the bottom of life and death for many years, he knew very well that when a strong and proud person said such words, they would become truly terrifying. The last 2 climbers began to climb the huge boulder at the top of the Academy's back mountain, and their figures suddenly disappeared. Under the big tree at the far end of the meadow, many figures suddenly appeared. They gathered together and pointed at the boulder and whispered to each other. There were men and women, some sitting and some standing, and there were exactly 12 of them. Some carried a 3-stringed zither on their backs, some had a chessboard under their armpits, some had an ancient flute placed in front of their knees, and some held a tightly wound embroidered cloth frame in one hand and a thin needle in the other. There was also a strong man standing behind a tree with a heavy iron hammer in his hand. When the others were discussing, the strong man was staring at the strange and tall ancient crown on second brother's head. His eyes were filled with eagerness to have a try. Chen Pippi walked out from behind the tree and was shocked by the strong man's eyes. He hurriedly stopped him and said, "Sixth brother, if you really hit him with the hammer, second brother's hat may be flattened, but your head is also very likely to be flattened. Second brother, who was sitting cross-legged under the tree, snorted coldly and slowly turned his head. Sixth brother put the iron hammer behind his back as fast as he could, and explained with a simple and honest smile, "Senior brother, you know, I feel itchy if I don't forge iron for a day. I can't stand it any more after looking at it for a whole day. When I see the hat on your head, it's like seeing the iron ingot by the stove, and I always want to hammer it." This explanation was truly inexplicable and absurd to the extreme. However, second brother nodded, indicating that he accepted this explanation. He waved his hand and indifferently said, "We'll see the results soon." The female professor of the academy, Yulian, was also at the top of the mountain. She seemed to deliberately keep a distance from the other 11 people, and stood in a flower bed far behind the tree, quietly watching the discussion of her peers with a smile. The man with an ancient flute on his knee looked at the seemingly shaky giant stone on the cliff edge, but in fact it had never trembled after thousands of years of wind and rain. He sighed with emotion and said, "Today, Prince Longqing is still the most powerful. The number 2 figure of the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace is really not to be underestimated. If nothing goes wrong, he may be our youngest brother." Hearing the words, "Judicial Department of the West Hill Divine Palace," everyone under the tree looked at Chen Pippi. Chen Pippi's chubby face showed a rare embarrassed expression. He waved his hand and explained, "I have never been to the Divine Hall. When I met Yi Hongyu, she had just entered the Judicial Department, but in my opinion she must be much more powerful than Longqing. The Tao addict, one of the 3 addicts in the world, is naturally extraordinary," Senior Sister Embroidery said with a smile. Second brother said with a serious expression, "All the famous sects have extraordinary resources. Although their methods are nothing in our eyes, and they are like dust compared to the academy, they are enough to travel in the world." Everyone under the tree praised and agreed with him. But in their hearts they were thinking that if it was eldest brother sitting under the tree today, he would definitely not make such a proud and narcissistic comment, and would only honestly comment on the merits and demerits of the West Hill Taoism. "I didn't expect that the one who could catch up with Prince Longqing and take the final exam with him would be Ningquebec." Everyone under the tree looked at Chen Pippi again. Chen Pippi sighed helplessly and said, "Senior brothers and senior sisters, why are you looking at me again?" Senior Sister Embroidery said with a smile, "Isn't he your friend?" Chen Pippi touched his head and said confusedly, "I didn't expect that Ning Ke could walk to the top of the mountain. Based on my understanding of him, this guy can really bear hardships. His muscles and bones have been polished like a pervert, and he can really cultivate without eating. So the mountain road at the beginning should not have been able to stop him. Moreover, he has read books in the old library for a year, so it is possible for him to pass the wooden door. But even the mountain fog could not stop him. Even I feel that it is really inexplicable." Someone asked, "What state is he in now?" Chen Pippi answered, "The no-doubt state." There was a light exclamation under the tree. The person who asked the question said unbelievably, "Prince Longqing is already in the upper see-through state, and only 1 step away from the knowing destiny state. It is not surprising that he could walk to the bottom of the stone. But that guy is only in the no-doubt state. How did he come up?" Second brother glanced at that person and reprimanded him in a low voice, "Nonsense. Of course he walked up." In fact, this sentence was really nonsense. But he was second brother. When the headmaster of the academy and eldest brother traveled to other countries, he was respected in the back of the mountain of the academy. Naturally, none of the younger brothers and sisters under the tree dared to point out this point bravely. Second brother slightly raised his eyebrows and unhappily reprimanded, "You have followed the teacher for so many years, but you still can't understand this kind of thing. How can there be a completely definite rule in the world? If all the rules are predestined, then why do we still cultivate and seek for it?" If all the rules can't be changed, then why do we still eat and drink? Why not jump down from the other side of the cliff? Everyone under the tree suddenly felt a sense of awe. They knew that senior brother was formally teaching them, so they listened attentively. Although Ninkei is only in the no-doubt state, who told you that no-doubt state can't reach the top of the mountain? If only people like Longqing, who have entered the upper see-through state and only one step away from the knowing destiny state, can reach the top of the mountain and enter the second floor, then why do we need to take the test? Second brother indifferently said, No doubt state can't climb the mountain? I have told you before that eldest senior brother stayed below the no doubt state for 17 years. He went up and down the mountain countless times. When did he roll down halfway? Someone hesitated and said, Senior brother, although what you said is right, isn't it too flattering to compare Ninkei with eldest brother? Second brother looked at the giant stone on the cliff and indifferently said, If Ninkei can succeed today, then he will be the second guy who can finish the whole journey of the back of the mountain under the no-doubt state after eldest brother. Hearing this, there was silence around the big green tree on the top of the mountain. Only Chun Pippi's unreconciled words could be vaguely heard. Eldest brother hasn't entered the no-doubt state, but Ninkei entered the no-doubt state 3 months ago. This is a big difference. In fact, it is not bad to let Ninkei be the youngest brother. Senior sister Embroidery looked at Chun Pippi's chubby face like a big white steamed bun and said with a smile, Although the feeling is not as good as Pippi's, he has dimples on his face and is really cute. Chun Pippi subconsciously shivered and hurriedly retreated behind second brother. He poked his head out and shouted, Seventh sister, don't be too optimistic. This last test is not so easy to pass. I bet that Longqing will climb up first. Senior sister Embroidery smiled and exposed his real thoughts. If Longqing really climbs up first, won't you be disappointed and cry? Chun Pippi chuckled. On the long mountain road, we first tested the willpower, then the power of comprehension and the state. Then we tested the heart in the fog. Finally, we tested the stubborn rock. It's just a choice. It won't be too difficult for Longqing or Ningquebec, second brother slowly said, because it is not difficult, it is a test of decisiveness after all. Longqing has been soaking in the dirty water of the judicial department of the Divine Hall for many years, and he can kill women and children without changing his expression. Maybe he can make a choice faster. A gust of mountain wind blew, and the top of the big green tree rustled. The long grass gradually fell down, and the silver night clouds at the foot of the cliff were disturbed. Yulien, who was standing on the cliff in the distance, looked back at the sea of clouds and slightly frowned. Under the big green tree, second brother suddenly stood up, and his expression suddenly became extremely serious. He quietly looked at the giant stone on the cliff, and after a long silence, he murmured, What a strong Howren sword style! Did the teacher change the last test? Why is it you again? You've already died twice and come back to life twice. Are you going to die a third time? I really don't understand why you always jump out of my mind. Do you want to remind me not to forget your villagers who were killed by Xiaoho? Or do you want to remind me not to forget how miserable your death was? Don't worry, I really haven't forgotten those things you left behind. But how can Xiaoho be so easy to kill? Hurry up and make way, I have to run faster than Prince Longqing. When I enter the second floor of the academy and become the headmaster's favorite student, I will learn the most magical skills in the back of the mountain of the academy. You only need to send me a dream and I will kill whoever you want me to kill. Be good, hurry up and make way. Don't make way? You want to practice the knife skills for me, right? Then can you do it another time? Ninkei said as he walked to the gray wall in the rain. Looking at the dying friend under the wall with a strange smile on his face, he sighed helplessly, grabbed a knife from nothingness, and directly cut him and the wall into nothingness. Look, it's still the same trick. The people in the back of the mountain of the academy are also like this. Can't they do something new? He did not put the knife back into the sheath, but carried the long-handled padao on his shoulder and walked to the top of the giant stone. Anyway, he might continue to cut people later, such as his father and mother, whom he had not seen for a long time, even in his dreams for a long time, or even that girl Sang Sang. Anyway, he had now confirmed that these were all fake, so there was no psychological barrier. Suddenly, his footsteps stopped. He looked at the two expressionless faces in front of him and said expressionlessly, "You finally came." Prince Longqing was very afraid. Facing this kind of fear, he did not know how to choose. His most beloved woman had fallen under a cluster of flowering trees. Her eyes that were dripping with tears of blood were not looking at her most beloved begonia flowers, but staring at him in a daze. But he could not look at her, he had to look at her. Previously on the mountain path, he had thought proudly that there was no one or anything in this world that could make him feel afraid except for Haotian. However, at this moment, looking at the woman in front of him who was bathed in holy divine light, and looking at the bright red fluffy clothes beside her, he knew that he could not erase the fear he had for this woman from the bottom of his heart. The whole world was filled with holy divine light, and it was unusually bright. It was so bright that the woman's face could not be seen clearly. Only her fluffy red dress could be seen, and only her fluffy red sleeves could be seen, and only the bright red flowers on her temples could be seen. The woman was dressed in a red dress, very bright and cute, but also very scary. She smiled and said, "Longqing, I heard that you want to enter the second floor of the academy. Do you think that you can defeat me if you enter the second floor of the academy?" Prince Longqing bowed respectfully and said, "I don't dare." More bloody tears flowed from the eyes of the flower addict Lu Chenjia, who was lying in the flowers behind him. "You really don't dare?" The woman who was bathed in divine light repeated indifferently. Prince Longqing slowly raised his head and looked directly at the pair of gem-like eyes in divine light. He was silent for a long time. Just as he was about to make the bravest decision in his life, he saw a silhouette. That silhouette belonged to a man. That man stood silently behind the woman, as if he would not speak for tens of thousands of years. Divine light swept past his cheeks, and a gem-like wind blew, as if Haotian was silently praising him. Prince Longqing stared at the wooden sword on the man's shoulder, and his body trembled uncontrollably. He made his decision without hesitation. He turned around and walked to the flower tree. He pulled out the sword from his waist and slowly stabbed it into the chest of his beloved woman. When the sword entered her chest inch by inch, Lu Chenjia quietly looked at her beloved man, as if she did not feel the slightest pain. Bloody tears no longer flowed from her eyes, and there was no resentment or hatred in her eyes. There was only calmness and pity. Prince Longqing slowly lowered his head and looked at his chest. He did not know when a transparent hole had appeared there. Of the two faces, one was extremely old, and the other was extremely young. Ning Ke looked at the old steward and then at his childhood playmate. After a long silence he said, "So I have to kill you all again. No wonder I always felt that something was wrong. Now I understand that it was because you all did not appear." He took down the long padao from his shoulder and held the hilt with both hands. However, he did not immediately swing it. This was because he realized that the place he was standing on had changed from the narrow stone steps on the giant stone to blackish yellow soil. On the wilderness, countless people looked up at the sky. The boundless darkness was spreading from the sky. People's faces were filled with despair and terror. The world was dark, and only a few rays of light shone from behind the clouds. Not everyone was looking up at the sky. At least, the old steward and his childhood playmate were not looking at the sky. Instead, they looked at him expressionlessly. No matter where he went, they followed silently, and their gazes always fell on his face. Ning Ke pointed to the sky and said to the old steward, "When I had a dream last time, there seemed to be a door of light there. I don't know why I did not continue with that dream today. Is it because of you all?" Then he looked down at his childhood playmate, who was only half his height, and said with a smile, "Last time in that door of light, there was an especially huge, golden dragon head that stretched out. In fact, that scene was very stupid. It was like those turtles we saw under the Wanyan Tower when we were young. The only difference was that those 10,000 turtles put their heads together and became a dragon head." The old steward and his childhood playmate still did not have any expression on their faces. Since it is a dream, it is naturally fake. Since it is fake, it is not a story that has already happened. Since it is not a story, of course there is no continuity. A tall man appeared on the wilderness. His gray hair casually draped over his shoulders. This was not the first time Ning Ke had seen this tall man. He walked over, wanting to see what the other party looked like. The tall man did not seem to turn his body at all. However, no matter how hard Ning Ke tried, he could not see the other party's face. When he circled around the tall man, the old steward and his childhood playmate were still behind him, circling with him. This scene seemed a little funny, but also a little inexplicably sad. The tall man pointed to the darkness that was occupying the entire night sky and said, "Look, it is really getting dark." Ning Ke looked up and said, "I see it." The tall man pointed to the light behind the clouds and said, "But there is still light there. Then between light and darkness, which side will you choose?" Ning Ke answered without hesitation, "Why should I choose?" The tall man did not answer this question. He grabbed the wine bag from the drunkard beside him and drank it all. Then he took the pig's hind leg from the butcher's back and squatted on the ground to eat. From the side, one could see the oil dripping down his beard. "Why do you want to kill your beloved woman?" "Because only by upholding the right path can one keep his Taoist heart." "My words are the right path." "Yes, because you represent the will of Haotian." Prince Long Qing walked in the holy divine light and followed the woman in the red dress. In the past long years, he had followed her to kill many people. As those lives died, he became calmer and calmer. He was no longer as calm as he used to be, but he was calm from the bottom of his heart. The woman in the red dress in the divine light suddenly turned around and said calmly, "If Haotian said you should kill me, what would you choose?" Prince Long Qing had a natural fear of her, and he was even more afraid of the man with the wooden sword who always stood silently behind her. However, after hearing these words, he only thought silently for a very short period of time, and then he raised the sword in his hand and stabbed. The tip of the sword pierced through the woman's body, and blood dripped down. The woman in the red dress looked at him with admiration and said, "Long Qing, now your heart has really become very strong." Prince Long Qing pointed to the transparent hole in his chest and said expressionlessly, "You see, I have no heart now." In the wilderness, the tall man asked Ning Ke with his back turned, "How did you choose before?" Ning Ke answered very seriously, "My body is in the darkness, but my heart is toward the light." The tall man laughed and swayed back and forth. He raised his sleeve to wipe the corner of his eyes and happily said, "I can't believe that after so many years, I can actually see a wild grass swaying in the wind on the wall." Ning Ke also laughed happily and said, "You see, I said it was not necessary to choose." The tall man gradually stopped laughing and looked at the rolling clouds in the sky. He suddenly asked, "But what if the sky falls?" "How can the sky fall?" "If. Then there will naturally be a tall person, such as you." "What if the tall person can't stop it?" "Then you can escape?" "If the sky falls, where can you escape to?" "Aren't you just imagining what if?" "How can there be so many what if in the world?" "Since it's just imagining, just answer casually. What are you afraid of?" Ning Ke stared at the tall man's back. Although the tall man said he just wanted him to answer casually, he did not know why he felt that he could not answer casually. He looked at the sky that was getting darker and darker and suddenly felt extremely afraid. The temperature in the wilderness suddenly dropped, and his clothes were stained with a faint layer of frost. The tall man sighed and said, "How about we go back to the first choice? Without a heart, there would naturally be no fear. Prince Longqing replaced the position of the woman in the red dress. Bathed in the holy divine light, he walked the world with the great will of Haotian, driving away and destroying the darkness everywhere. One day, when he walked to the center of a desert made of gold gravel, the man who had stood silently behind the woman in the red dress for countless years finally appeared. The wooden sword behind him trembled slightly in the scorching gold wind. Prince Longqing looked at the man and said after a moment of silence, "From the moment I made the first choice, my fate was closely linked with Haotian. Even if you are the most powerful person in the world, you can't defeat Haotian." A gust of wind rolled up the gold gravel in the desert, and the wooden sword pierced through Prince Longqing's chest. Prince Longqing looked down at the transparent hole in his chest. The wooden sword that seemed to be able to pierce through everything in the world just passed through the hole in his chest without causing any damage to his body. A golden flower grew out of the transparent hole in Prince Longqing's chest and instantly melted the wooden sword. He raised his head and looked at the man's silhouette that was gradually fading in the gold wind. He said, "You see, this is our truth." After saying this, he turned around and left. The most feared enemies in his life had died one by one. Prince Longqing walked proudly on the desert made of gold gravel. Although he had lost his heart, he was still proud. He knew that from now on in the world of light of Haotian, he would be the most powerful and invincible person. All the darkness would avoid his light when it saw it. No, all the darkness must be torn apart and annihilated. No one knew how many years had passed, and all the darkness in the world had been annihilated by him. There were no more enemies around him, no more sins. There was only the purest light, the boundless light that shrouded the surroundings. At this time, the golden flower on his chest had become very large and almost covered his face. Even though he was in the Tianqi state, he felt that the weight was somewhat unbearable. However, he could no longer remove the golden flower. Suddenly, a distant voice sounded in the depths of his heart. He did not know who this voice belonged to, but he knew that what this voice said was true. Absolute light is absolute darkness. Prince Longqing was silent for a long time, and then he pressed his hand on the huge golden flower on his chest. In a flash, the huge golden flower rapidly shrank and turned into a golden sword. He roared in pain and struggled to pull the golden sword out of his chest. He looked around blankly. In a blur, he faintly saw several illusory faces floating in the sky. It was the man with the wooden sword on his back. It was the woman in the red dress. It was the beloved woman who fell under the flower tree. The three illusory faces looked at him indifferently, as if they wanted to see what choice he would make. There was light everywhere and darkness everywhere. If he took a step forward, he would walk into the light and continue his killing. However, it was the light. Prince Longqing stood in the golden desert, trembling all over. His face twisted in pain, and his whole body was drenched in sweat. He looked down at his left hand, at the green bamboo piece that seemed like the source of life. All of a sudden, a lot of people disappeared from the wilderness. Ning Ke looked at the familiar face of the old steward in front of him, and then he squatted down to stare at the face of his childhood playmate. After staring for a long time, he suddenly raised his head and shouted at the tall man with dissatisfaction, "I still don't understand why I have to make a choice." The tall man said to him with his back facing him, "I said it was just a casual discussion. Why are you so serious?" Ning Ke stood up, and the frost on his body rustled down. He said, "I don't choose." The tall man replied, "Sometimes there are always things that are worth sacrificing. Sacrifice is a choice." Ning Ke shook his head and said, "I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I sacrifice myself?" The tall man asked in surprise, "Don't you have someone or something that you are willing to sacrifice for?" Ning Ke frowned and thought for a long time, and then replied hesitantly, "I don't think so." The tall man said, "But you made a choice a long time ago. Ning Ke looked at the old steward and his childhood playmate beside him and said, "That's sacrificing others." "Sacrificing others is also a choice." Ning Ke admitted, "Yes." The tall man hung the remaining half of the pig's hind leg on the back of the butcher and said, "Then you choose again." The night was still night. The temperature was still dropping little by little. Ning Ke looked at the approaching darkness in confusion, and then he suddenly looked back at the bright place behind the clouds, feeling the endless pressure coming from it. His body was occupied by an unprecedented fear, and the frost on his clothes gradually condensed into armor. He didn't know which direction he should choose. He stood alone between the heaven and the earth, looking so small. The old steward and his childhood playmate stood in front of him, and their eyes met through the transparent ice. He clenched the emerald green bamboo in his hand. In the front yard of the academy, everyone was silently waiting for the final result of climbing the mountain. At this moment, no one would use a sarcastic tone to talk about the academy student named Ning Ke, because he had proved himself with facts. The heavy sound of hooves broke the oppressive silence of the academy. Yen Sei walked down with Sang Sang expressionlessly. Those who knew his identity were suddenly shocked and stood up to greet him. The most powerful minister of offerings of the South School of Haotian had his own exclusive seat in the West Hill Divine Palace. His status was far above that of the deputy headmaster of the Revelation Institute, Mo. Lee. No one dared to slight him. The instructors and students of the academy soon knew the identity of this wretched old Taoist priest. They looked at the side in surprise and whispered. They didn't understand why this bigwig would suddenly come to the academy in the middle of the night, and at the critical moment of climbing the second floor. No one, including Prince Li Peiyan and Princess Li Yu, knew the purpose of Yen Sei's visit. Of course, Yen Sei would not be stupid enough to explain the reason to the crowd. After silently greeting those who were worthy of his greeting, he sat in the chair and closed his eyes to rest. His skinny palms brushed the back of the chair from time to time, showing a little bit of nervousness. Although everyone was curious about the reason of this high and mighty divine talisman master's visit, no one could ask since he did not say. After a short silence, someone began to whisper about the movement on the top of the mountain. Most people marveled at Ning Ke's hidden strength, but they still firmly believed that Prince Long Qing would be the final winner and successfully enter the second floor of the academy. As a divine talisman master, Yen Sei's state was so high that he could clearly hear the discussion no matter how low it was. Thinking that Ning Ke really wanted to enter the second floor, and even was only one step away from entering the second floor, the successor that he had been looking for half of his life would become a mirage, Yen Sei's mood could not help but be extremely bad. At this moment, Priest Molly said indifferently, "We, the West Hill, never think that a prince will lose to anyone. I know a little about Ning Quebec. He is indeed good at talking about heresy, but if he wants to enter the second floor..." Yen Sei slammed the table heavily and shouted sternly, "That is absolutely impossible." Hearing this, everyone was shocked. They all thought that the South School of Haotian of the Tang Empire had always been at odds with the West Hill Divine Palace, and it could even be said that they were at odds with each other. Why would Yen Sei stand on the side of the West Hill Divine Palace tonight before such an important matter? After all, he was the senior brother of the nation master of the Tang Empire. Could it be that his statement had any important meaning? Yen Sei did not expect that his sincere words would cause so many people to speculate. He angrily pulled his beard under his chin and refused to express any more opinions. Li Peiyan looked at the old Taoist beside him and frowned. Could it be that my brother in the palace knew that Ning Ke had appeared in the opening of the second floor today, so he specially sent Yen Sei to express his attitude? At this moment, another horse carriage drove in, and the person who walked out of the carriage caused another round of discussion. Li Yu looked at the kind-looking chief eunuch and asked with a frown, "Old Lin, what are you doing here?" The deputy chief eunuch of the Tang Imperial Palace smiled humbly and said, "Your Highness, I am here on His Majesty's orders. Liu waved him forward and asked in a low voice, "What is going on?" Eunuch Lin lowered his eyes and said softly, "His Majesty wants to see someone, so he asked me to wait here." "Who does my father want to see?" Liu asked in surprise. Eunuch Lin smiled and said, "A student of the academy." After saying this, Eunuch Lin saw Yen Sei sitting beside him and his expression suddenly turned cold. He said, "Master Yen, why are you here?" Yen Sei glared at him and said, "Do I need to report to you where I am going?" Eunuch Lin said with a fake smile, "I am just a eunuch. How can I control where a divine talisman master goes? But His Majesty wants me to bring you a message." His Majesty said that the Imperial Preceptor had cheated him of a few hundred taels of silver at the Fragrance Workshop more than 10 years ago. Now, the Imperial Preceptor dares to hide the talent that His Majesty appreciates. His Majesty is waiting for an explanation from the South Gate. Hearing this, Yen Sei was stunned and fell into deep thought. He was shocked. Could it be that His Majesty also knew about Ning Kei's ability and wanted to steal his disciple from him? What should he do? Now that he might have to compete with the Academy for Ning Kei's disciple, he was already in a difficult position. Did he have to compete with the Emperor of Tang? Younger brother said that he could do whatever he wanted, but did that include His Majesty? Everyone in the field intentionally or unintentionally looked at the two bigwigs who suddenly arrived. Yen Sei was the divine talisman master, but Eunuch Lin was His Majesty's most trusted chief eunuch. What did he mean by coming here with His Majesty's decree? Sang Sang followed Yen Sei into the academy. No one noticed her at all. She left the front yard and walked quietly along the alley between the buildings of the academy to the back. She walked through the wetland, the old academy with all the lights out, the dense forest, and the rarely visited meadow. She looked at the scenery of the academy and compared it with Ning Kei's usual narration. She felt calm and warm. Finally, she walked into the forest of swords. She held the smooth trunk, raised her head and squinted at the top of the forest with a few strings of sparse leaves hanging at a very high place. Then she chose a slightly clean place to sit down, holding the big black umbrella in her arms, and looked up at the top of the mountain. The clouds and mist between the mountains were still extremely thick, and it was impossible to see through the top of the mountain. But Sang Sang leaned against the trunk and held the big black umbrella quietly. She knew that her young master was at the top of the mountain and was going through the most critical test. All of a sudden, a gust of wind blew in from the outside of the sword forest, bringing with it countless grass and gravel, which hit the trunk and even lifted the hard bark. Sang Sang hid behind the tree in horror and opened the big black umbrella to cover her thin body. Outside the old and dirty big black umbrella, the wind was raging around the sword forest. The gravel hit the surface of the umbrella like arrows, making loud banging sounds. It was like the sound of war drums, stirring up one's emotions, but also extremely tragic. In the gust of wind, more than a dozen trees in the sword forest were uprooted and flew into the deep night sky with mud. Like a dozen awe-inspiring swords stabbing into the night sky. It splashed with jet-black blood. On the Wanyan Tower in Chang'an, Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at monk Huang Yang and laughed. "A monk came from the west today," monk Huang Yang said with a smile. "The enlightenment of the love monk doesn't make you so happy. You seem to be in a very good mood today. Can you tell me why?" Li Qingshan stood up, flicked his sleeves and said with emotion, "After tonight, there will be one more young genius in our South School of Haotian. More than 10 years later, there will be one more divine talisman master in our South School. Do you think it's worth being happy about?" Monk Huang Yang put his palms together and sincerely praised, "It's really delightful." Suddenly, Li Qingshan raised his eyebrows like a sword and walked quickly to the edge of the tower. Looking at the quiet night sky in the south, his right hand hanging outside his sleeve trembled and his fingertips kept flexing and stretching to calculate. Monk Huang Yang walked to his side and looked there in confusion. he said. Why did the opening of the second floor make such a big noise? Li Qingshan's body suddenly became stiff and he said with a gloomy expression, We can't get it. Headmaster, it's really several floors high. The fierce wind that swept through the Academy's sword forest was limited to a very small area and miraculously did not affect the surrounding environment. Except for second brother at the top of the mountain and divine talisman Master Yen Sei in the front yard, only nation Master Li Qingshan and monk Huang Yang, who had entered the upper state of knowing destiny, could sense it. The common people in Chang'an City had no idea about it. At this time, it was deep in the night and most people had fallen asleep. A few bloodstains gradually appeared on the gray wall of Lin 47th Street. The sewage in the sewer of Spring Breeze Pavilion that had just been repaired suddenly had a blood-red luster. In the backyard of the lakeside house and the blacksmith shop in the eastern city, in the broken stone lion outside the former general's mansion and in the woodshed of Grand Secretary Xingjing's mansion, those bloodstains gradually appeared and then quickly disappeared. In front of the boundless pressure of light, Prince Long Qing crushed the emerald green bamboo and then looked up expressionlessly. He found that he was still standing on the top of the back mountain of the Academy, standing under the giant rock by the cliff edge. He had never taken a step on the stone path. The night wind blew at his clothes, quickly dispersing the sweat. He was silent for a long time, then took a few steps back towards the lawn. Then, he raised his head again to look at the top of the boulder on the edge of the cliff. There was no trace of anyone there. In the cold wilderness, Ning Ke seemed to feel something. You all know that this choice is not difficult for me, he said loudly to the tall man, to the steward in front of him, and to his childhood playmate, to the light and darkness in the sky. When he spoke, the icicles hanging on his lips cracked and fell. He blinked and the transparent ice that blocked his sight cracked inch by inch. He raised his right hand and more frost armors fell off his clothes. Then he threw away the emerald green bamboo in his hand and held the long knife again, waving it down with force. After many years, he once again killed the old steward and his childhood playmate in front of him. My umbrella is black. Her face is black. Ever since I was a child, everything I did was black. But it doesn't mean that I think I'm wrong. Since I'm not wrong, I don't need to admit it or atone for it. Ning Ke looked at the increasingly bright light behind the clouds and felt the increasingly powerful pressure. He said, Even if you think I'm wrong, I don't care. Because what do your thoughts have to do with me? He fiercely spat on his feet and carried the long knife on his shoulder. He resolutely walked toward the darkness on the other side of the wilderness. The tall man looked at his back and said nothing. Walking into the darkness was like walking into the starlight. Ning Ke stood on the giant rock by the cliff edge, standing at the highest point of the back mountain of the Academy. He calmly looked at the scenery in front of him. The starlight from the stars in the night sky fell on the slowly flowing clouds under his feet, making the surroundings as bright as daytime, although it was still late at night. He glanced at Prince Long Qing, who stood under the rock in the distance, and said nothing. He turned back and continued to silently look at the 10,000-year-old starlight and cliff in front of him. The moment of starlight and flowing clouds were intoxicated in the mountain breeze of the spring night. Only by climbing to the top could one see such beautiful scenery. This world is flat. He looked up and saw the edge of the world under the stars. He could faintly see the peak of the mountain breaking through the clouds. He did not know whether it was Min Mountain or some other mountain. After 17 years of wandering and meeting each other in life and death, he finally came to this moment. How could he not think about it? In an instant, Ning Ke thought of many things in the past. He thought of the years that he had repeated on the mountain road. However, all these feelings finally gathered into the most sincere and simple sentence when he finally said it. Looking at the indescribable scenery, Ning Ke laughed. He laughed so hard that his body trembled. He laughed so hard that tears and snot flowed down his face. Then he wiped away his tears and snot and said seriously, "It's so damn beautiful. If you like this work, please come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 159. The people under the big green tree looked at the young man who was giggling at the top of the scenery on the edge of the giant rock. They were all touched and smiled silently. Only second brother was still sitting solemnly and meticulously. There was also a gray-haired old scholar who was reading an old book in his hand. It seemed that everything that happened around him had nothing to do with him. The melodious sound of a flute sounded. The man picked up the flute on his knees and played it with a smile. Then came the sound of a three-stringed zither. Seventh sister picked up an embroidery needle, as thin as a cow's hair, with her fingers and gently stroked it in the mountain wind. The tip of the needle trembled at a high speed and made a clear sound like that of a metal instrument. The strong man raised a heavy iron hammer and smashed it on the ground, making a loud bang. The hammer fell precisely on the point of excitement in the music. The sound of the flute, the zither, the needle, and the hammer mixed together to form a rather ancient song. It spread out from under the green tree and enveloped the cliff of the back peak of the academy. It urged the floating clouds to flow slowly among the cliffs and the pine trees to sway slightly, as if they were welcoming guests. Standing on the boulder, Ning Ke listened to the ancient song. He looked back at the big tree and saw those men and women with different appearances but gentle smiles. He looked at Chun Pippi under the tree and knew that these people were the senior brothers and sisters of the second floor of the academy. They were expressing their welcome to him in this way. He could not help but feel warm in his heart. The warm feeling quickly turned into a burning sensation in his chest and abdomen. He blacked out and fell down. Prince Long Qing stood silently on the lawn under the boulder, as if he had not heard the moving ancient song. His young face, which was like a peach blossom in spring, was still perfect. But his hair, which was slightly wet with sweat, was loose and messily draped over his shoulders. He raised his head and said, "Maybe it's a little ridiculous and lacking in demeanor, but I really don't accept it." Unknowingly, second brother stood up in the ancient song and came to the lawn. He looked at Prince Long Qing's cheek and the two dim lights in his eyes. He said calmly, "If I were you, I wouldn't accept it either." After a moment of silence, Prince Long Qing said, "If you can't see through the choice, who can?" Second brother looked at him and said with a faint pity, "You can't see through the choice. That means there is fear in your nature, whether it is about the choice or something else. Although I don't know what you've seen and experienced, I can roughly guess that Ning Ke is different from you. He has no fear in his nature, so he doesn't need to erase his heart as hard as you did." Prince Long Qing stared at his eyes and asked with strong puzzlement, "Fear is human nature. As long as you are human, you will be afraid. Ning Ke is also a human. How can there be no fear in his nature?" Second brother was silent for a long time. It seemed that this question was indeed a little confusing. He shook his head and said, "Maybe this is the difference between a small fear and a big fear. Both of you can overcome the instinctive small fear, but when it comes to the big fear between life and death, between day and night, the situation is different." Prince Long Qing understood what he meant. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "You mean Ning Ke has no faith?" Second brother answered, "Maybe so." Prince Long Qing was startled, and then he gave a self-deprecating and sad smile. He murmured, "Because my faith is too strong, I lost to a person who puts himself first and has no faith at all. How can I accept this?" After a moment of silence, second brother said, "Maybe Ning Ke has faith, but the faith is hidden too deep in his heart. The illusion on the stone path can't be stimulated. Maybe even he himself doesn't know what his true faith is." At this time, Chun Pippi carried the unconscious Ning Ke down from the giant rock, panting heavily. With every step he took, the fat on his cheeks would tremble slightly, like the ripples in a lake. He was very clear that Ning Ke had fainted because his spiritual world had suffered too much today, and his body had been severely exhausted. Moreover, he had succeeded in reaching the top and relaxed too suddenly, so he was not too worried, just like his senior brothers and senior sisters under the big green tree. Prince Long Qing looked at Chen Pippi's back and listened to the faint voice calling his younger brother to fetch water from under the tree. His pupils slightly shrank as he thought of the person that the hierarch lord and that woman had occasionally mentioned. He asked incredulously, "Is this him?" It seemed that second brother did not want to hide Chen Pippi's identity. He nodded and said, "Yes." Prince Long Qing looked at the fat lad who was ordered around and thought of the regret and anger of the hierarch lord and that woman in the red dress when they mentioned him. It was difficult for him to adapt to the contrast between the legend and the reality. The lad in the temple who was said by the hierarch lord to be more talented than that person was just an inconspicuous youngest brother on the second floor of the academy. Looking at the scene in front of him, he suddenly found that his experience today was not so gloomy and unacceptable. After a moment of silence, he sighed and said, "A real genius like him should be ordered around by you in the second floor of the academy. At first, I thought that I could shock the academy after climbing up the mountain. Now it seems that I am really stupid and arrogant. A real genius is a genius no matter where he is." Second brother followed his gaze to the tree and said, "Since he is a genius in the temple, he is certainly a genius in the back of the mountain of the academy. Although he is much worse than me, you don't have to be too disappointed. In fact, your performance today is very good. If Ning Ke is not more than you, I should be very happy to welcome you in the back of the mountain." Prince Long Qing sighed and bowed deeply to second brother. Then he turned around and walked down the mountain. The quietness in the front yard of the academy had long been replaced by a buzzing discussion like that of wild bees. Those high and mighty bigwigs still maintained their aloofness, but the ordinary officials, instructors, and students could no longer suppress the excitement and curiosity in their hearts. They eagerly awaited the final result of the ascent of the second floor, wanting to know who had won. The professor, who was responsible for presiding over the opening ceremony of the second floor of the academy, walked out slowly. The expression on his face was really a little strange. It seemed that he was very gratified and a little shocked. It seemed that he wanted to laugh, but also seemed to be worried about something. Today, few people, including the students of the academy, knew the identity of this professor. But today, this person presided over the whole day of climbing up the mountain. It was obvious that his identity was distinguished. After several inquiries, people finally knew that he was a divine talisman master who hid in the academy and cultivated in seclusion. At this time, seeing him appear in front of the stone steps, they suddenly stopped talking. Looking at the complicated expression on the professor's face, everyone's heart was stirred again. They had a feeling that something unexpected was about to happen. "Huang He, what are you doing there?" The only person in the field who dared to speak to the professor in this tone dared to directly call out his name, and even deliberately added the word could only be Tang Hao, the divine talisman master of South Heaven School, Yen Sei. Whether in terms of state, seniority or age, he was above Professor Huang He. Moreover, he was a little anxious. Seeing this person dawdling, it was inevitable that his tone was a little stiff and impatient. Today, the result of the enrollment of the second floor of the academy has been announced. Professor Huang He did not want to argue with Yen Sei, the famous divine talisman master, so he looked at the crowd on the stone platform and said slowly. Suddenly, Yen Sei thought of a possibility. He suddenly stood up and stretched out his hand to stop him. "Don't say it in a hurry." The drama that had been waiting for a day and a night was about to end. Finally, people could know the real appearance of the hero after taking off the silver mask. But it was interrupted by someone again. Even if people on the front yard of the academy were extremely in awe of Yen Sei's identity as a divine talisman master, they finally hissed. The law could not punish the masses. No matter how powerful a divine talisman master was, he could not kill all the hundreds of people on the field. Professor Huang he unceremoniously glared at Yen Sei. He thought to himself, "You are the one urging me, but now you are telling me not to say it in a hurry. What are you trying to do?" He asked helplessly, "Why?" Yen Sei rushed up the stone steps and said righteously, "The opening of the second floor of the academy is a big event. Although the headmaster of the academy is traveling in other countries and is not in the capital, you can't be so perfunctory. Before announcing the result, shouldn't you first take a bath and change your clothes, burn incense and worship heaven?" The hissing under the stage suddenly became more violent. Even Prince Li Peiyan and Li Yu could not help but look at the old Taoist priest. Listening to the noise under the stage, Yen Sei could not help but feel a little feverish even though his face was as wrinkled as the hard bark of an old tree. However, the thirst for a successor finally overcame his little sense of shame. He fiercely shouted to the audience, "Who dares to say that I am wrong, stand up and argue with me alone." The audience suddenly became silent. Whether it was Priest Moli or those professors and instructors of the academy who looked displeased, they all turned their faces away. They all thought in their hearts, "Duel with you, a senior divine talisman master who has cultivated to a high level? We are not crazy." Professor Huang he looked at him unhappily and said, "Uncle Yen, what on earth do you want to do?" There were very few divine talisman masters in the world. The seniority among them had nothing to do with their respective sex, but another set of simple and complicated system. Professor Huang he asked Yen Sei what on earth did he want to do. In fact, what Master Yen Sei was thinking at this time was very simple. If the result announced by the Academy is that Ning Ke has successfully reached the top, and if this result is heard by everyone on the stone square and then spread to the world, won't it be a foregone conclusion? Then what else can my younger brother and I do to snatch him away? Ignoring the angry eyes of everyone on the Academy's front yard, Yen Sei dragged Professor Huang he into a study room. Those who entered the study room with them were all bigwigs who were qualified to participate in this matter or had the power to change the final result. Priest Moli looked a little confused. He felt that he must have misheard something, so he cast an inquiring look at His Highness beside him. Li Peiyan also looked a little strange. He felt that he should not have misheard, so it could only be that Professor Huang had misread when announcing. In order to confirm his thoughts, he looked at his niece beside him. There was no expression on Li Yu's delicate face. Although she had guessed it countless times, and had even hoped for this result countless times during this long time of climbing the mountain today, when this result really appeared, it still caused a violent shock to her world, making it difficult for her to recover in a short period of time. Priest Moli's eyes slowly swept over the faces of those bigwigs, and the responses he got were the ones he did not want to see the most. He slowly stood up and looked at Professor Huang he with some confusion. He asked confusedly, "You said that the person who reached the top was Ning Ke?" Professor Huang he nodded slightly and said, "It is indeed Ning Quebec." Priest Moli stood stiffly beside the chair and could not say a word for a long time. As the Deputy Dean of the Revelation Institute of the West Hill Divine Palace, he was ordered by the hierarch to lead a delegation to visit Chang'an of the Tang Empire. The main purpose was to fulfill the secret agreement between the two countries and send Prince Longqing to the second floor of the academy. Priest Moli did not have a good impression of the academy. In his opinion, there was no need for a God's favored one like Prince Longqing to study on the second floor of the academy. But since this was the arrangement of the Divine Hall, and the whole world now knew that Prince Longqing was going to enter the second floor of the academy, then he must go because it represented the glory and dignity of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, who could have thought that after such a long wait, it was not Prince Longqing who finally entered the second floor, but someone else? thinking of the punishment that he might suffer under the wrath of the hierarch if this matter was spread back to the West Hill, and thinking of the hundreds of millions of followers of Haotian Taoism in the world who might waver in awe of the divine hall because of this matter, Molly felt as if he had been washed by ice water from head to toe, exuding a piercing chill from the inside out. He murmured, "Impossible, impossible." Suddenly he raised his head and angrily waved at Professor Huang He to protest. How could an ordinary academy student defeat Prince Long Qing? The prince is only one step away from the knowing destiny state, and that student is nothing. The academy must have done something. If the people outside the study room who were still waiting for the result knew the result, they would probably have the same opinion as Priest Molly. After all, the one who competed with Prince Long Qing today was not Wang Jinglu, who was invincible below the knowing destiny state, but an ordinary academy student who no one knew could cultivate. How could such a person defeat Prince Long Qing? Could a vole defeat a goshawk? Could an ant defeat a lion? Could the embroidery lady defeat General Xiahou? Could Ning Ke defeat Prince Long Qing? No, these were all impossible, unless God broke the goshawk's wings and sharp beak, unless God turned the lion into a pile of rotten meat in advance, unless Her Majesty betrothed the embroidered lady to General Xiahou as his official wife, or unless the Academy secretly cheated. The bigwigs in the study room all looked at Professor Huang He with puzzled and questioning eyes. Professor Huang He forcibly suppressed the anger in his heart and explained expressionlessly, "As far as I know, Prince Long Qing performed very well in climbing the mountain. If it were in the previous years, he could definitely enter the second floor of the academy easily. But you and I both know that the second floor only recruited one person this year, and Ning Ke did reach the top of the mountain before the prince at the last moment." Priest Molly sat back in the chair in a daze. Suddenly he saw Prince Li Peiyan beside him, as if grasping at the last straw, and said, "Your Highness, according to the previous agreement, the prince will enter the second floor of Chang'an City in place of the crown prince of the Yen. If not for being a student of the headmaster of the academy, how could the West Hill Divine Palace let the prince leave the judicial department? If the academy finds a reason not to accept him, then—" Li Peiyan frowned slightly and felt very embarrassed. The Tang imperial family had always been very polite to the academy and rarely interfered with it. However, Prince Long Qing entered Chang'an City as a hostage as the second person in the judicial department of the West Hill Divine Palace. The two sides had indeed reached a secret agreement, and His Majesty had also expressed his approval of this agreement. However, whether it was the West Hill Divine Palace or the Tang imperial family, no one could have imagined that someone could actually defeat Prince Long Qing and enter the second floor of the academy. Therefore, they had never thought that such a situation would occur. Li Peiyan looked at Professor Huang He and said after a moment of hesitation, "I think this matter should be considered at length." Professor Huang He was expressionless. Li Peiyan looked at Yen Sei and Eunuch Lin, who had been sitting silently in the corner. He thought to himself that His Majesty and the South Gate had sent the two of them here to wait for the result. Naturally, they had the responsibility of supervision. At this time, the two of them had to express their opinions and choose a side. Feeling the prince's gaze, Eunuch Lin stood up and explained to the crowd with a smile, "His Majesty sent me to the academy to pick up someone. It has nothing to do with what you are discussing. Naturally, I can't speak on behalf of the palace. Let me express my opinion. I firmly oppose Ning Ke entering the second floor." Yen Sei blew his beard and stared at him. He said, "Even if you think with your butt, how can that guy be stronger than Prince Long Qing? How could he reach the top of the mountain earlier than Prince Long Qing? The academy must have a problem." Professor Huang He's face darkened. He looked at him and said, "Uncle Yen, we are familiar with each other, but we still need evidence." Yen Sei stared at him and said, "The academy has evidence. It is said that you did not cheat?" Hearing his unreasonable words, Huang He said angrily, "Uncle Yen, are you going to act shamelessly again? So what?" Yen Sei raised his wretched triangular eyes and shouted, "Anyway, the headmaster of the academy is not in Chang'an." Since the headmaster of the academy was not in Chang'an or the academy, as the minister of offerings of the south gate of Haotian, he had nothing to fear. As a sacred divine talisman master, he had no scruples in bringing this matter up. This shamelessly acted shamelessly. The bigwigs in the study room looked at Yen Sei's impassioned objection and were all stunned. Thinking of his previous statements on the stone platform, they could not help but wonder what had happened to the south gate of Haotian today that made them so strongly support the West Hill Divine Palace. Priest Moli looked at Yen Sei and felt strange. He thought that last year when this old Taoist returned to the Divine Hall, he had humiliated the head of the Revelation Institute and even quarreled with the great divine priest. But today he was so protective. Could it be that he cherished Prince Longqing's talent? It was true that he cherished talent, but he did not expect that Master Yen Sei desperately opposed it and wanted to cherish the talent of someone else. Professor Huang He looked at Yen Sei coldly and said, "Uncle Yen, although you have a high status and seniority, this is the Academy's business after all. So it is useless for you to oppose it." Yen Sei angrily rebuked. "The Academy belongs to the world. Everyone in the world has a reason to raise doubts and opinions. The Academy belongs to the Tang Empire. As a Tang citizen, I have the right to oppose it. You say it is useless to oppose it, but I still have to oppose it. Ning Ke cannot enter the second floor." It was unknown when Liu quietly walked out of the study room and came to the front yard of the academy. An official stood behind her. He had just learned the final result of today's mountaineering from Her Highness. He was shocked and tongue-tied. Then he remembered that he was the one who admonished Her Highness last year and thought that Ning Ke had no future. He could not help but feel regretful. After tonight, countless people will investigate Ning Ke's background. They will definitely find out that he escorted Her Highness back to the capital last year. In order to make up for the mistake he had made, the official began to think quickly. He disagreed and said, "In any case, Ning Ke is relatively close to us. In this case, Her Highness should stay in the study room and ensure that he can really enter the second floor." Liu said lightly and sarcastically, "Those people inside are older than me and have seen more things than me. But they have forgotten some of the simplest things. The academy opened the second floor to recruit students for the headmaster of the academy. Ning Ke can reach the top first, which means the headmaster of the academy has chosen him as a student. In this case, it is meaningless for those people inside to quarrel for a long time and fiercely." She looked up at the mountain behind the academy and thought about how excited the lad must be at the top of the mountain at this time. She also thought of the return journey full of killings last spring and the past when she recruited Ning Ke but was rejected. She could not help but show some confusion and disappointment between her brows. She murmured, "At that time, I thought that I valued him enough and had given enough sincerity. Now it seems that I finally understand why he rejected me at that time. After all, I can really see through him." The official looked at the expression on Her Highness's face and guessed what she was upset about. He softly comforted her and said, "Her Highness treats his little handmaiden very well. I heard that he has a good relationship with her. In this way, no matter what happens, Ning Ke will always remember Her Highness's kindness." "These are two different things." Liu frowned and shook her head. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said slowly, "Of course, now it can become one thing." People in the front yard of the academy pricked up their ears and wanted to hear what the bigwigs in the room were talking about. They wanted to know who was the first to reach the top of the mountain and who could enter the second floor of the academy. Many people noticed that Her Highness had left the room very early and stood quietly in a place not far away. They could not help but start to peep at the expression on her face, trying to guess the truth from her brows and eyes. Situilan, who was close to the princess, did not need to be so far away to observe the expression on her face. She walked directly in front of Liu and bowed respectfully. Then she looked at Liu anxiously and asked in a slightly trembling voice, "Her Highness, who won?" Liu looked in the direction of the study room and listened to the faint fierce quarrel coming from inside. Suddenly, her thin brows slightly raised and a rather elusive smile appeared on her face. She decided to cut the Gordian knot and settle this matter in advance. He won. It was just 3 simple words without mentioning the name of the winner, but Situilan naturally understood what Liu wanted to express. She raised her hand to cover her mouth to block the exclamation of disbelief, and her shining eyes were full of shock and joy. After all, the exclamation could not be covered by the palm. The girl's surprised cheers broke the tranquility of the academy at night. She jumped up excitedly and ran to the crowd with a smile. She held her companion's hand and shook it desperately. At this moment, without Situilan saying anything, everyone knew the final result. There was a dead silence on the stone platform. Zhong Dajuan's face was livid and he murmured in a trembling voice, How could it be him?" Xie Qingyun's body slightly swayed and he gently let go of Jin Wucai's support. He stubbornly stood up straight and looked at Situilan with a slightly pale face. He said in a hoarse voice, "You have always known that he was hiding his strength? So you have been waiting to see us make a fool of ourselves." Since the semester exam in the summer, Ning Ke had been ridiculed, excluded and ignored by the academy students. Only Situilan and Chu Yuxian treated him the same as before. Chu was the son of a rich and dissolute family and was originally different from the academy students. Needless to say, Situilan was born in a rich family and belonged to the same world as Xie Qingyun and others, but she had always taken care of Ning Quebec. Today, Xie Qingyun and the academy students were shocked and speechless. When they carefully recalled the scene that day, they naturally thought that Situilan had long known that Ning Ke had been hiding his strength. Situilan looked at the pale Xie Qingyun and the academy students who were as shocked as wood and sneered. "I don't know what kind of strength Ning Ke has hidden. I only know that if you had not been watching him make a fool of himself in the past 6 months, you would not have become the biggest joke in the world today." In the past, Ning Ke was a despicable guy in the eyes of the students and the biggest joke in the academy. However, watching him climb the mountain today, the students were extremely humiliated to find that this ridicule was actually so appropriate. Turned out that they were the biggest joke in the world. With a light clap, the remaining pastries in Chu Yoxian's hand all fell to the floor. He stared blankly at the mountain behind the academy and thought with ecstasy, "I actually know such a great guy. If my father knew it, would he still dare to say that I have made friends with scoundrels in the academy? Father, you have made a big mistake this time." There was a dead silence on the stone square. All the students fell into a deep feeling of shame. Some people lowered their heads that were usually proudly held high, and some even became a little numb and sluggish because of this mental shock. At this moment, an angry roar sounded from the study room. "Ning Ke's cultivation is so poor, how can we let him enter the 2nd floor?" This roar barely woke Zhong Dajuan up from the huge mental shock. He seemed to catch the last sharp knife, raised his eyebrows and said quickly in a trembling voice, "Listen, listen, that is Master Yensei speaking. He said that Ning Ke's cultivation is poor and can't enter the 2nd floor. Master Yensei, that is Master Yensei. I heard that he is the legendary divine talisman master and the senior brother of the nation master of Tang. Even he thinks so. Who can be sure that Ning Ke can enter the 2nd floor?" Zhong Dajuan turned his head and stared at Situilan, saying in a trembling voice, "Did you hear that? It's not what you think." In the study room, Yensei roared with a livid face, "Did you see that? This is the token of the South School of Haotian. What I said today represents the attitude of the whole South School of Haotian. I think whether it is the West Hill Divine Palace or His Majesty, This little bit of respect must be given. Professor Huang he looked at him, as if he was looking at an idiot. After a long silence, he frowned and asked, "Uncle, what do you want to do in the academy today? Can you put forward your request directly, and then we will see if we can discuss it?" "Well." Yen Sei quickly changed his expression and pointed at Huang He with a smile, saying, "This is what you said to discuss. If you can't discuss a satisfactory result later, I will not comply." Professor Huang He looked at the Divine Talisman Master, who was probably the most senior in Chang'an City, helplessly crying. He spread out his hands and said, "You first." Yen Sei coughed twice and said, "Speaking of the state, Ning Ke is far inferior to Prince Long Qing. But speaking of some unorthodox skills, he has some potential to be cultivated. So I think he is not suitable to enter the second floor of the academy. He is more suitable to be my disciple." He had said this as calmly and naturally as possible, but it still made the bigwigs in the study room suddenly change their expressions. Professor Huang he took a step forward with his eyes wide open, and Priest Moli even stood up in surprise. "You mean, Ning Ke has the potential to become a Divine Talisman Master?" Professor Huang he stared at him and asked. Yen Sei looked at his expression and felt regretful. He secretly thought that he had endured for such a long time, but why did he fail at this critical moment? So he decided to throw caution to the wind and said with a cold snort, "Yes, so what? I chose him first." In this world, the successor of a Divine Talisman Master was as rare and precious as the phoenix feather in the legend. It was too important for both the Divine Talisman Master and the sect he belonged to. Hearing Yen Sei's confirmation, the bigwigs in the room could no longer keep calm. Priest Moli took a few steps forward and angrily stared at Yen Sei and said, "Uncle, since you have found a candidate with the potential to become a Divine Talisman Master, why didn't you inform the Divine Hall first?" "Nonsense. If I informed you first, would I have anything to eat?" Yen Sei stared at him and said. Now it was Professor Huang He's turn to smile. He looked at Yen Sei and said gratefully, "Uncle, do you think the academy will let Ning Ke go after knowing this?" Yen Sei suddenly changed his expression. He pointed at Huang He and angrily roared, "You shameless villain! If you didn't say we could negotiate, I wouldn't tell you this." Thinking that there was a new student on the second floor of the academy, and this new student might even grow up to be a Divine Talisman Master in the future, Professor Huang he was very pleased and proudly said, "Of course we can negotiate. If all the negotiations have a predetermined result, then there is no need to negotiate." Yen Sei angrily said, "You are shameless." Huang he smiled and said, "Learn from uncle." Yen Sei's beard and hair crazily spurted out. He angrily shouted, "I, Yen Sei, have found such a good talent in half of my life. Whoever dares to compete with me for this disciple, I will be irreconcilable with him. Even if I have to burn my body and break my bones, I will crush his bones and scatter his ashes." Huang he shook his head and laughed. "Uncle's words are so cruel. If I didn't have the whole academy behind me, perhaps I would really be afraid. I, Yen Sei, have spent half of my life. Ning Ke, good talent, disciple, can't coexist with me, crush his bones and scatter his ashes." The furious words of Divine Talisman Master Yen Sei went out of the study room like thunder and exploded on the stone floor of the academy. The smile that Zhong Dajuan had just squeezed out suddenly froze on his face, which looked extremely funny. If the fact that Ning Ke had successfully reached the top and entered the second floor of the academy was the first thunder in the hearts of the students of the academy, then at this time, a respected Divine Talisman Master crazily shouted to accept Ning Ke as a disciple, which meant that Ning Ke might become a Divine Talisman Master in the future, was like the second thunder in the hearts of the students. After the thunder, the students of the academy stood on the stone floor in a daze, as if they had been struck by lightning, and did not know what to say at all. Chu Yuxian looked at the pale face of Zhong Dajuan and sighed sympathetically. If I were you, I would go to the kitchen to pick up a piece of sour stinky tofu overnight and kill myself. In this way, you won't waste the fresh tofu, and the taste is very compatible with your sour word. Please cast your monthly vote and recommendation vote. The latter is Song Song's natal item, which will never give up. Thank you for your love to me. I will continue to work hard. This chapter is amended 201112010359. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to cast your recommendation vote and monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 160. The Divine Talisman Master Yen Sei was in a bad mood. He stared at Professor Huang He in front of him and said coldly, "Anyway, your academy can't accept Ning Quebec." Professor Huang He raised his eyebrows slightly and said mockingly, "Uncle, why can't our academy accept him?" Yen Sei roared, "That kid is born to cultivate divine talisman Taoism. Who else in the world is qualified to be his teacher except me?" Professor Huang He sneered and said, "Only divine talisman masters are qualified to be his teacher? Well, we can find 2 or 3 divine talisman masters, even if we can't find other powerful figures in our academy." When he said this, his tone was as if he was talking about how he could always pull out 2 or 3 green radishes from his backyard. Divine talisman masters were indeed rare and honorable, but the academy was not an ordinary place after all. He was even a divine talisman master himself. The academy's foundation was so deep that no one could compete with it except the West Hill Divine Kingdom. Yen Sei suddenly became speechless and said shamelessly, "Anyway, I saw him first. Don't think about robbing him." Huang He sighed and said, "Uncle, you are a man of virtue and prestige. Don't always act shamelessly, okay?" Yen Sei spat and said angrily, "Look at me, your martial uncle. Every day I go to the brothel and hug girls. Every pore of my body is filled with the word wretched and obscene. Where do you see me as virtuous and respectable? Even if you throw away your old face and feel inferior today, it's no use." Professor Huang He looked at him and said seriously, "His Majesty the Emperor and the Master of Nation may buy it. Even the hierarch and the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace may buy it. But our academy will never buy it." The conversation in the study room seemed a little ridiculous. However, the dispute between 2 divine talisman masters, no matter how hooligan-like they were, was bound to be particularly tense because of their identities. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became oppressive. At this moment, Prince Li Peiyan suddenly said with a smile, "In fact, what's the point of arguing about this matter? In my opinion, since Ning Kei's cultivation is only in the no-doubt state, far inferior to Prince Long Qing, then let Prince Long Qing enter the 2nd floor and let Master Yen Sei accept Ning Kei as a disciple. In this way, the Empire, the West Hill Divine Palace and Master Yen Sei will be satisfied, and Ning Kei will still be a student of the Academy's front yard. The Academy will have 2 students with great potential at the same time. Isn't this a perfect ending?" Professor Huang He was slightly stunned when he heard this. He felt that it made sense, but there was something wrong. Li Peiyan looked at him and said gently, "If the Academy is restricted by the system and can't make this decision, you can let Ning Kei withdraw himself. As long as he gives up the qualification to enter the 2nd floor, who in the world dares to criticize the Academy?" Professor Huang He frowned and said, "Why should Ning Kei give up?" Li Peiyan did not answer his question immediately, but turned to Master Yen Sei and asked with a smile, "Master, I want to know, if Ning Kei becomes your disciple and enters the South School of Haotian Taoism to cultivate, how will you and the nation master treat him?" "Of course, we will treat him as a nephew and teach him everything we know," Yen Sei answered resolutely. Li Peiyan looked at Professor Huang He, smiled and spread out his hands, saying, "We all know that the nation master doesn't have any outstanding disciple, and Master Yen Sei has no successor. If Ning Ke enters the South School of Haotian Taoism, as long as he attentively cultivates himself, and with the careful training of the two masters, he may be the future nation master of the Tang Empire. With such a bright future, why wouldn't he be willing? Professor Huang, he finally understood where the previous question came from. He slightly clenched his hands in his sleeves and stared at the prince's eyes, thinking that the prince's move was really cruel. If Ning Ke was really tempted by the title of the future nation master of the Tang Empire and decided to withdraw from the second floor of the academy, what reason did the academy have to compete with the South School of Haotian Taoism for him? Previously, Yen Sei had been retreating in order to advance, and advancing in order to retreat. Now the wheel of fortune had turned, and it was the academy's turn to retreat in order to gain time to think about the response. Professor Huang, he said firmly, no matter what Ning Ke's opinion is, we must consult all the instructors of the academy on this matter. Otherwise, it will be a trifling matter. In the early morning, Ning Ke woke up rubbing his eyes at the first glimmer of dawn. Glancing at the glimmer of light outside the window, he silently calculated and knew that he had not been in a coma for too long. He got up and walked to the table. He raised the pot of herbal tea and gulped it down. His spirit was suddenly refreshed. He looked around and found that this should be the residence of the academy. Walking to the door, he stretched out his hand and slowly pushed the wooden door open. The warm morning light penetrated through the narrow gap of the door and shone into his eyes, causing him to involuntarily squint his eyes. Suddenly, he came back to his senses and looked at the morning light. He stood at the door like a fool, unable to move. The long mountain path, the arduous process of climbing from noon to dusk and late at night, the repeated life fragments of joys and sorrows, the black wilderness and the strange dream all came back to his mind. I reached the top of the mountain. I entered the second floor. Ning Ke stared blankly at the morning light through the crack of the door. Only then did he realize what he had experienced and what he had done. For a moment, he could not help but be stunned. There was a perplexed smile on his face, as if he could not believe that all this had happened. Thinking of the last step of climbing the giant rock last night and the painful choice in the wilderness, he could not help but smile and shake his head. He wondered who had set up the illusion to make a secular boy like him make such a mysterious choice. It was like asking a butcher to think about philosophical problems. Even if he could come up with the right argument, who knew what the reasoning process was? He laughed to the sky and went out. Ning Ke pushed open the wooden door in front of him with a smile and walked into the beautiful morning light. Then he found several officials standing outside the door, and then he actually had to make a very difficult choice. You are not a student of the second floor of the academy yet, so you still have a chance to quit. You still have a chance to choose a completely different but equally wonderful and bright path. You are even destined to be famous all over the world. Prince Li Peiyan sat in the chair and slowly took a sip of the hot tea at hand, slightly reducing the tiredness caused by lack of sleep. Looking at the silent academy student in front of him, he continued, I think you should choose the second path, because this matter involves the harmonious relations between the imperial court and the West Hill. Although the Tang Empire is never afraid of any enemies and will never bow to external pressure, Prince Longqing entering the second floor is an agreement made by His Majesty and the Divine Hall. As long as you take the initiative to quit the competition of the second floor of the academy, the difficulties faced by many people will be easily solved. The empire will bear much less pressure, and all aspects will benefit from it. Li Peiyan found that Ning Ke remained silent and slightly lowered his head without any response. He was a little displeased and said, as a citizen of the Tang Empire, it is natural to share the burden of the empire. Of course, even I will feel that it is too absurd and rude to ask you to quit the second floor of the academy, not to mention you. So I will give you an absolutely sufficient reason. Li Peiyan slowly leaned forward and stared at the top of Ning Kei's head. He said, "As a noble divine talisman master, Master Yen Sei did not hesitate to pretend to be a fool to take you back as his disciple. You can imagine how much he will value you in the future and how carefully he will train you. 10 years later, you will become a high and mighty divine talisman master, and you will become the hope of the South School of Haotian. The nation Master Li Qingshan only has 2 disciples, both of whom are useless. He respects his senior brother very much, and he knows better than anyone else the significance of a divine talisman master to a sect." Ning Kei still remained silent, but his heart was stirred. He had just entered the 2nd floor and won the favor of a divine talisman master. Just overnight, he, an ordinary and unknown student, a nobody who sold calligraphy in a shabby alley in the eastern city, had become a fragrant sesame cake that both the Academy and the South School of Haotian wanted to fight for. He was even regarded as the hope of the South School of Haotian. Shouldn't the words, "hope of the South School of Haotian," be exclusive to people like Prince Longqing? "I know you have a good relationship with Her Highness." Li Peiyan looked at him and said gently, "I can also give you a promise here. As long as you are willing to share the burden of the Imperial Court, the Imperial Court will never treat you badly. I also owe you a personal favor. In the future, when you enter the knowing destiny state and become a divine talisman master, you will naturally be the next nation master of Tang." Li Peiyan continued, "The 2nd floor of the Academy is, of course, an extremely wonderful place. However, looking back at the history books, how many students of the 2nd floor can leave their names behind? But if you become the nation master of Tang, there will still be countless people who will remember your name after thousands of years." The future nation master of Tang? Although Ning Kei's expression was as calm as usual, his emotions had long been shaken by these words. He seemed to see a brilliant golden road unfolding under his feet. Should he give up the 2nd floor of the Academy to learn from the divine talisman master and fight for the future of the nation master of Tang, or enter the 2nd floor to learn exquisite cultivation methods from the headmaster of Academy? This was really an extremely difficult choice. He even felt that the choice he made last night in the wilderness by the cliff was easier than this one. Ning Kei looked at the prince's face and knew that as long as he nodded, his future would be infinitely bright. He believed that these words were true. He believed that as long as he had the opportunity to learn from the divine talisman master, he could really become the nation master of Tang in the future. If it was not this man who said these words to him, he might really be very tempted. Li Peiyan looked at the emotional reaction in his eyes and vaguely guessed what he would choose. His face suddenly became serious and his right hand tightly grasped the handle of the chair. He stared at his eyes and said in a low voice, "This is the opportunity that Haotian asked the Imperial Court to give you. If you miss it, you will be punished by heaven." There was no doubt that this was a naked threat. In the face of such a threat, even if Ning Kei really became a student of the 2nd floor of the Academy, he had to seriously consider this threat. Because he lived in this world, then he would be bound by the rules of this world. Ning Kei bowed respectfully and said, "Your Highness, after all, I am a student of the Academy. I have studied in the Academy for a year and have deep feelings for you. I am willing to share the burden of the Imperial Court, but I have to consider the feelings of the Academy." Some people unceremoniously put the power and pressure of choice on Ning Kei's shoulders to avoid angering the Academy. However, Ning Kei was a person who seemed to be straightforward but was actually slippery. How could he take the initiative to take this kind of responsibility? With a light sentence, he directly threw the power and pressure of choice back to the prince. As for whether the Academy would choose to give up on him and accept Prince Longqing into the 2nd floor, Ning Kei was not worried. He and Li Yu had quite a tacit understanding on this matter. Before the headmaster of Academy returned, no one in the Academy dared to make decisions on their own. In fact, deep in his heart there was actually another thought. If the academy could not even resist the pressure of the imperial court and finally gave him to the South School of Hautian Taoism, then why should he stay in such an academy? Who would not be willing to be a nation master of Tang? His Enli Yu's thoughts were not wrong. It was just that there were always some deviations between reality and ideas, because they did not expect that the instructors of the academy also cherished Prince Longqing's talent, and that the instructors were not all Tangs. In the early morning of the academy, the instructors were sitting in the room and arguing fiercely. Indeed, they could not reach the fastest conclusion because the headmaster of academy had not returned. However, it was precisely because the headmaster of academy was not in the academy that they had the courage to express their own views. Chao Jifeng, the associate professor of etiquette, said angrily, "Many people think that the academy cheated in this examination. I don't know whether this is true or not. I only know that Prince Longqing came out of the fog very early. Then why did he stay outside the fog for such a long time? Why did he finally take the last step with Ninkei? What on earth happened in the middle?" Professor Chao was a senior professor of the academy, so his words naturally had some power. Although everyone in the room knew that this professor from the Yen Kingdom raised an objection because he was not happy with Prince Longqing's failure, no one could really explain his question. Some instructors even secretly thought that perhaps those in the back mountain had played some tricks in the examination. An old woman in a blue gown with a bamboo broom in her hand looked at the arguing crowd as if she was looking at an idiot. She said, "What a boring discussion. Whoever reaches the top first will be accepted. Such a simple question, why do you have to complicate it?" Chao Jifeng, you have been going to Chang'an to see your prince every day recently, and when you return to the academy, you cry bitterly, thinking that he is the hope of the Yen Kingdom's revival. But what does this have to do with the academy? I can't listen to it anymore, I'm leaving. The honorary female professor of mathematics of the academy left, and several professors who were dedicated to academic service and did not want to be bothered by mundane affairs also left one after another. However, the debate in the room became more and more intense. Many instructors thought that the imperial court's proposal could indeed satisfy all parties. In that case, why not make such a choice? Did they have to offend all the forces for Ninkei? When Associate Professor Chao Jifeng was angry again and impassioned again, the door was suddenly pushed open with a squeak. All the instructors looked at the door in astonishment. After a moment, they saw a pink and tender little face poking in, with a pair of black eyes rolling. It was a little attendant who walked in. He was fresh and lovely with a little shyness. Looking at the instructors, he asked softly in a mosquito-like voice, "My young master has something to ask you, so he asked me to pass the message." The instructors in the room knew the identity of the little attendant and asked gently, "What does Mr. Second want to ask?" "My young master got up this morning and found that there were still a lot of irrelevant people staying in the academy, so he lost his temper." The little attendant opened his eyes wide and looked at the people in the room, saying, "He wants to ask you why the notice hasn't been posted after one night? What are those irrelevant people still doing here? Do they want him to invite them to dinner?" Hearing this, the instructors looked at each other and did not know how to answer. They all knew that the second brother of the second floor of the academy was indeed a little silly, but they never thought that he would call people like the Prince and Master Yen say irrelevant people. Professor Chao Jifeng glanced at the little attendant and said, "The candidates for the second floor have not been decided yet, so the notice naturally can't be posted." He thought that such a statement would make the other party unhappy, and was ready to explain to him. However, he did not expect that the little attendant was really too shy. After hearing an answer, he lowered his head and walked out of the door. The argument of the instructors in the room began to continue, but it did not take long before the door squeaked again. The little attendant's pink face was covered with drops of sweat, which showed that he had just run in a hurry. He looked at the instructors and said, "Young master asked, what do you mean by the candidates for the second floor have not been decided yet?" Professor Chao Jifeng said unhappily, "What do you mean by not decided yet?" "Not decided yet means not decided yet." Ning Ke actually defeated Prince Longqing and went up the mountain first. Many people have doubts about this matter, and they suspect that the back mountain cheated. If people are not convinced, how can they decide? The little attendant looked at him blankly, and after a long time, he suddenly came to his senses. He said yes and turned away. No one knew whether he had understood Associate Professor Chao Jifeng's words or not. The room was quiet, and the instructors did not argue again, because they strongly felt that the little attendant of the second brother would come back soon and continue to ask those stupid questions. The door squeaked open. The little attendant looked at Associate Professor Chao Jifeng with his big eyes and asked, "Young master asked, who is not convinced?" Professor Chao Jifeng was stunned. Looking at the little attendant's fresh and lovely pink face and his blank expression, he really could not tell a lie, nor did he want to push those people outside the academy to the front. He flicked his sleeves and frowned, saying, "I am not convinced." The little attendant was about to turn around and leave, when he suddenly thought of the latter half of what the young master had said to him on the mountain. He quickly turned around, scratched his head and smiled embarrassedly, and asked, "May I ask who you are?" "I am Chao Jifeng." Associate Professor Chao Jifeng said unhappily, "Why do you ask this?" The little attendant showed a matter-of-fact expression and said, "Because young master wants to know who is not convinced." After saying this, the little attendant turned around and went out, running to the back mountain again. The door was squeaked open again. The little attendant panted and held the door frame, looking at Chao Jifeng and said, Young master said." Chao Jifeng could not help laughing. He shook his head and sighed. "What did your young master say?" The little attendant swallowed and looked at him very seriously, saying, "My young master said that the academy has never been divided by country, and accepts talents from all over the world. Chao Jifeng, you are from Yen Kingdom, so you are loyal to Longqing. I don't blame you, but you have to remember that you are a professor of etiquette. How did you teach the first class to the students of the academy? What is the etiquette of the academy?" The little attendant's pink face raised his eyebrows from time to time, showing indifference and displeasure. He was obviously imitating the expression of the second brother of the academy when he spoke, which looked very funny and cute, causing a burst of laughter from the instructors in the room. However, Chao Jifeng could not laugh. The smile on his face instantly disappeared, and he suppressed his anger and asked, "What does Mr. Second want to say?" "Chao Jifeng, you said in the study room that the etiquette of the academy is the rule, and the rule depends on who has the power to make the rules." The little attendant looked at him and said seriously, "The headmaster of the academy and eldest brother are traveling in other countries, so in the current academy, I am the only one who has the power to make the rules. So no matter whether you are convinced or not, you must be convinced. Post the notice immediately." Chao Jifeng was stunned for a while, and then he angrily waved his academy robe and protested, "How can such a domineering behavior convince the public?" The little attendant did not know that this was a true expression, and thought it was also a formal question. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly raised his little hand happily, applauded and said happily, "Young master is really smart. He even guessed this sentence of yours. He asked me to tell you." The expression on Chao Jifeng's face was very ugly. The little attendant looked at him, pretended to be serious and said, "I don't need to convince the public, I just need to obey." An instructor could not bear to see Professor Chao's embarrassed expression at this time, and said, "Even if we don't care about the views of His Majesty, Master Yen Sei or the West Hill, we should always respect Ning Kei's own choice." When the wooden door was pushed open again, the little attendant's clothes were all wet with sweat. He raised his sleeves to wipe the sweat on his forehead, and it took a long time for him to calm down. He looked up at the people in the room and relayed second brother's conclusion for the last time. Respect Ning Kei's own choice? Why should I respect him? As for the nation master of Tang. At this point, the little attendant deliberately paused for a long time. Then he raised his slightly pointed chin, rolled his eyes at the roof, and snorted clumsily from his little nose. He imitated the expression of the arrogant man on the mountain, making him look very cute. Is it very great? On a flat cliff in the back mountain of the academy, green pines were angrily spreading to welcome guests, and white clouds were flowing among them, like a fairyland on earth. There were two people standing on the edge of the cliff. One of them was wearing a very dirty and tattered Taoist robe. The other one was wearing a very strange ancient crown. Second brother of the academy turned around, looked at Yen Sei, the minister of offerings of the South School of Haotian, expressionlessly, and said, "How dare you reach out to the academy, and even want to steal my teacher's student? Not to mention you, even the Haotian hierarch of West Hill doesn't have this weight." Yen Sei smiled strangely, looked at him and said, "The second brother of the academy is really the proudest second brother in the world, and your words are really unpleasant. But I am older than you, so I won't fight with you, lest people say that I bully the younger generation. But I must take Ning Kei away. Even if the headmaster of academy is here, I will still have this attitude. If you want me to die, I have to do it." Second brother looked at him with a slightly mocking smile and said, "Don't make so many excuses. If you are not senile, you should remember that my seniority is higher than yours, no matter from the teacher or Pippi. Since you want to steal Ning Kei from me, how can we not fight?" "I said I won't fight, so I won't fight." Yen Sei looked at the crown on his head and said sarcastically, "The back of the mountain of the academy is your home field, and I am not so stupid. Anyway, if I don't fight, you can't fight with me. As for Ning Kei, it depends on his attitude. In the future, my younger brother and I will make sure that he will become the nation master of Tang, which is better than staying in this mountain every day and being bullied by your senior brothers." Second brother rolled his eyes and said sarcastically, "The nation master of Tang is so great? Isn't he still bullied by the Li family and those old fakes in West Hill every day? The nation master of Tang is not a nation master, but a little wife who is bullied but does not dare to cry. Oh, this little boy is so cute. It reminds me of my childhood. Why was I so dull and boring? Study hard and make progress every day?" To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 161. Yen Sei was so angry that his whole body trembled. However, before he had time to react, he heard another sentence coming from the cliff edge. "Oh, I was wrong. Li Qingshan, and you still dare to cry. Only children who can cry have milk. Now your problem is that you don't know whether to throw yourself at the left or the right." Yen Sei was stunned by this sentence, and his anger was forced to be sublimated into embarrassment. He said angrily, "How vulgar the words are." Second brother turned around, looked at him calmly and said, "Sh*T is also the way. As long as it makes sense, you don't need to care about the words." Yen Sei shook his head again and again. Looking at Fang Jing, who looked solemn, he sighed and said, Junimo, how do you want the world to see you? I really don't understand how a proud and stupid person like you can live for so many years." Second brother smiled slightly and stood on the cliff edge with his hands clasped behind his back. He said, "I rarely go down the mountain, and I won't provoke those few people I can't afford to offend. Those few people who can afford to offend me don't dare to go up the mountain to provoke me. Naturally, I can live well. As for you, you are never in the list of people I can't afford to offend. Except that you have lived decades longer than me, how can you be stronger than me in terms of ability, state, and seniority? So, in front of you, what can I do even if I am a little proud?" Don't you know how to respect the elderly and the wise? Yen Sei angrily flicked his sleeves. If living longer is worthy of respect, then when I was born as a baby, wouldn't I have to bow and kowtow to every person I saw? It does make some sense to respect the wise, but Yen Sei, how can you be called a wise man? Second brother turned around and looked at the old face of the divine talisman master with some contempt and disappointment. He said coldly, "If you hadn't been stupid enough to take the pure Yang oath to enter the Tao of calligraphy, how could you still stay at the upper state of knowing destiny and not be able to take that step?" The content of this sentence, especially second brother's tone of pity and sorrow as an elder, directly poked Master Yen Sei's sore spot. He waved his sleeves wildly and shouted, "I haven't crossed that step, but can you?" Second brother looked up at the sky and said with a sneer, "You're old and weak. You don't have many years to waste. But I'm different. In recent years, I've often been touched by something. I know that if I can find an opportunity, I'll definitely be able to take that step." Yen Sei was slightly stunned. He suddenly thought of something and mocked. Rumor has it that Liu Bai of the South Jin Kingdom's first step had already stepped on the turbid waves of the Yellow River. I wonder if your feet have ever touched the clouds? Hearing the words Liu Bai of the South Jin Kingdom, second brother's expression changed slightly. There was not a trace of vigilance or resentment in his eyes. Instead, he was excited and said, "Yu Xing is also a genius and is a disciple of the headmaster. If he can't take that step before Liu Bai, wouldn't he be ashamed to death?" Hearing this answer, Yen Sei was stunned and speechless. He thought that even Liu Bai, the most powerful man in the world, could not destroy this person's pride and confidence. After a moment of silence, he tentatively asked, "How about Yi Su?" Second brother frowned slightly and showed a look of disgust, as if saying that it was ridiculous for Yen Sei to compare him with that loser. Yen Sei gasped and thought that second brother even looked down on the world wayfarers in the abbey. Then he continued to ask, "What do you think of the other two?" Looking at the divine talisman master's face, second brother felt that the questions he asked were getting more and more stupid. He didn't bother to answer and directly said, "Let's cut the crap. Do you want a successor or do you want a divine talisman master in the South School?" Master Yen Sei was puzzled and asked, "What's the difference?" Second brother was silent and let him think by himself. Yen Sei suddenly understood the hidden meaning in his words. Without hesitation, he resolutely said, "Of course I want both." Second brother tilted his head and looked at him quietly. After a long time he said, "You really take it for granted." Yen Sei frowned and said, "What do you mean by take it for granted?" Second brother shook his head and said with emotion, "Take it for granted. That means you are dreaming." Yen Sei was speechless. Second brother looked at him and said, "I have already made a concession. If you insist on taking 2 steps forward, then we might as well fall off this cliff together. At that time, we'll see whether you survive or I survive. If I survive, we'll forget about it. If I die, you can do whatever you want. I think this proposal is more concise and powerful. What do you think?" Yen Sei said grumpily, "I'm a talisman Taoism practitioner. If you don't let me fall down and become a meat pie, then you can open the inhibition formation in the mountain to save your life. How could you say such a vicious idea? Why do you hesitate for such a long time for such a simple choice?" Second brother waved his hand and said, "In my opinion, of course, it's more important to have a successor. Otherwise, when you die at the end of your life, there will be no one to send you off. Isn't it a pity that all your talisman Taoism skills will turn into mud and dust together with your body? As for the South School of Haotian, as long as the Tang Empire doesn't perish, as long as those old farts from West Hill still want to preach in the Tang Empire, they can naturally last for thousands of years. How can they lack a divine talisman master?" He looked at Yen Sei and continued, "I can make the decision for the academy." After Ning Ke enters the second floor, As long as you don't force him to join the Hautian Taoism, he can learn some talisman Taoism from you when he's free. Yen Sei said angrily, how can the wonderful talisman Taoism become talisman Taoism in your mouth? Junimo, don't bully me too much. It's okay if the headmaster of academy said so. But you're just a student of the academy, where did you? Before he finished his words, second brother stared at him and waved his hand to stop him. He said, do you want it or not? Say it quickly. If it weren't for the fact that you first discovered Ning Kei's potential, do you really think that there aren't many divine talisman masters in the academy? In the end, any argument or quarrel relied not on words, but on physical strength. Such a simple sentence reflected the unparalleled confidence of the academy in the world. Yen Sei suddenly turned into the autumn leaves, dejected and colorless. After struggling for a long time or a short time, Yen Sei finally made a difficult decision. He looked at the white clouds under the cliff and the magnificent city of Chang, and in the distance, and sighed silently in his heart, younger brother, I'm sorry. In a room of the academy, Prince Li Peiyan of the Tang Empire was still educating Ning Quebec. However, no matter how he inculcated Ning Kei with the righteousness of the country and the interests of the people, Ning Kei, who stood in front of him, was always willing to answer one sentence. Ning Kei looked at Li Peiyan with a sincere smile on his face, and answered in a very sincere tone, I'm a student of the academy, and I'll listen to the academy. The smile on Li Peiyan's face gradually faded, and he looked at him coldly and indifferently said, very good. Ning Kei seemed not to notice the emotional changes of this bigwig, and replied politely with a slight bow, Your Highness, you flatter me. Li Peiyan pushed the door angrily, thinking that if Ning Kei really entered the second floor, how would Prince Long Qing deal with it? If Brother Long Qing knew the news, would he blame him for not doing a good job? How would the imperial court explain it to the West Hill? Thinking of these questions, his expression naturally did not look good. He coldly glanced at the official beside him, and asked with the last hope, how did the academy reply? I believe they won't have other ideas about such a beneficial thing, right? The official replied with a bitter smile, Your Highness, the notice has been posted, and the academy has confirmed that Ning Kei can enter the second floor. I've previously asked for the reason, and Professor Huang he said that it was the decision of the second floor, and they didn't need to tell us the reason. Li Peiyan was slightly startled, and then immediately became furious. However, although he was a prince of the Tang Empire, he had no influence on the academy, especially the second floor at the back of the mountain, which had a special status. No matter how angry he cursed, it would only expose his own shortcomings. Almost in a flash, he transferred all his anger to Ning Kei in the room. He did not know when, but Eunuch Lin came to his side and kindly reminded him, Your Highness, in my opinion, His Majesty is actually not concerned about how to explain it to the West Hill. As for Ning Kei, perhaps you'd better not pay attention to him. After confirming that the prince and the officials of the imperial court had left the academy, Ning Kei walked out of the room. He walked along the garden's roofed corridor for a few turns, and suddenly saw a chubby figure standing under the willow tree. Ning Kei walked forward, and very seriously bowed to the ground, saying, Thank you. Chin Pippi very seriously said, Since you're thanking me, you should be more practical. Ning Kei thought for a moment and said, I'll invite you to my house for dinner in a few days. I'll ask Sang Sang to make hot and sour noodle slice soup for you, and I'll tell you that her cooking skills are no worse than those in the Eastern City. I usually don't tell others this secret. Chin Pippi did not reply, but looked at him and suddenly said, From today on, we're senior brothers. Ning Kei looked at his round face, and although he was somewhat unwilling, he had to bow again after a sigh, and said, Senior brother. Chin Pippi smiled, and did not stop him at all. He looked at Ning Kei's head and said proudly, Junior brother, you don't have to be so polite. Ning Kei looked up, and the two looked at each other and smiled. After a whole year of acquaintance in the old library, a loser who could not cultivate finally became a member of the second floor of the academy. Whether it was Ning Ke himself or Chun Pippi who saw this miracle happen with their own eyes, they all sighed with emotion. Chun Pippi said with emotion, "Teacher once said that there is a kind of cicada in the arid land of the far west. It hides in the mud for 23 years, and only wakes up when the snow mountain melts and the flood comes. It takes a bath in the mud, dries its wings in the cold wind, and finally flies into the void." Ning Ke smiled and shook his head, saying, "You and I don't need to talk like this. Do you want me to flatter you again?" Chun Pippi said, "This description is not exaggerated. You're a loser who has no acupoints connected, but suddenly jumped into the blue cloud. What's more shocking is that you have the potential to be a divine talisman master, and even alarmed Master Yen Sei of the South School of Haotian." In fact, until now, Ning Ke did not know what was going on. He had never seen Master Yen Sei, and only knew from others that he was a very great divine talisman master, and was the senior brother of the nation master. But why did he choose him? Coming to the familiar environment, beside the familiar wetland, Ning Ke saw the most familiar thin figure. He walked up, looked at Song Song's tired face, and looked at the grass and leaves in her yellowish hair. He reached out to pick them up carefully and said gently, "You've been waiting for me for such a long time. You've worked hard." Sang Sang looked up at him and said seriously, "Young master, you've really worked hard." After a whole night of mental and physical suffering, and being shocked by the ecstasy of the final success, Ning Ke directly fainted on the top of the mountain. At this time, although he had rested for a while, he still felt a little confused in his mind. Sang Sang did not tell him, but last night she hid under the black umbrella alone like a wounded little beast, avoiding the hurricane that came out of nowhere and raged through the sword forest. She was also very tired, panicked, and weak. The master and the handmaiden supported each other, and walked slowly and painstakingly along the wetland in the morning light towards the plain. The front yard of the academy was much quieter than last night. The officials and envoys had already left, and most of the students of the academy stayed. They gathered under the notice and looked up at the familiar and strange name that they had deliberately forgotten for half a year, but today it was forced back to them in such a cruel way. They were shocked and speechless. The students didn't leave even after knowing the final results of the second floor exam. Subconsciously, they wanted to see Ning Ke walk in front of them. Only then would they be able to prove that all of this was not an illusion. However, this subconscious thought was a little too masochistic. The morning light was no longer bright, and gently shone on the academy at the foot of the mountain together with the spring breeze. Two figures, one big and one small, slowly walked out from the back of the academy, and everyone subconsciously looked at them. After a night of climbing and rolling on the mountain road, Ning Ke's academy spring clothes were torn in many places. Together with the traces of mud and the stains of pastries, he looked extremely embarrassed. Sang Sang, who was walking beside him, was not much better. She was covered in dust, and there were many grass chips on her hair and shoulders. She looked dirtier and older than the big black umbrella she carried on her back. However, in the eyes of the students of the academy, the master and the handmaiden who were walking slowly were shrouded in the spring breeze, and looked very clean and bright, as if they had become a part of the spring breeze and the morning light. This was the so-called scenery. Ning Ke walked to the front of his classmates and took out the handkerchief from his chest pocket. He shook it twice in the air to shake off the pastry crumbs. Then he smiled and handed it to Chu Yuxian, whose face was full of fatigue but eyes were burning with passion. Since the semester examination, Ning Ke had spent more than half a year in the academy. It was not too bad for him, but there were not too many good things. Other than the old library, the meadow and the sword forest, there were only those friends who insisted on being friendly to him. There was no doubt that Ning Ke's best quality was to hold a grudge. But what was worth remembering was the real hatred that could only be washed away with blood, and not the rumors that could not shake his emotions. Correspondingly, he could also remember favors. Whether it was Chao Xiaoshu, Chun Pippi, or the two people in front of him, they were all people he would never forget. Ning Ke looked at Situilan, who was standing in the morning light in an arrow suit, and said with a smile, "I rarely let my friends down. My brain was blocked by shit today, and it took me 5 or 6 hours to write it out. Fortunately, I have a day off tomorrow, and I can adjust. This is probably the advantage of having a day off every week. Have a good weekend, and see you on Sunday." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 162. Situilan didn't wear the Academy's spring clothes today, but a crimson archery outfit. She didn't have any makeup on her face, and her eyes were as delicate as a painting. The somewhat mature crimson outfit was worn by her. She stood in the morning light and looked at Ning Quebet. Her eyes were full of pure joy. Especially after hearing Ning Ke's words, the smile in her eyes suddenly became brighter. The expressions of the Academy students were very complicated. They didn't know what they should do or say at this time to dilute the embarrassment and sense of shame in their hearts. Over a dozen recommended students from the military ministry had walked out at some point in time. They walked in front of Ning Ke and bowed in a very formal manner. Chang Jingming, who was in the lead, looked at Ning Ke's face and said, "We apologize to you." Ning Ke looked at them and didn't say anything. Chang Jingming looked at the expression on his face and explained after a short pause, "It's not because you won the competition, or because you entered the second floor, or even because you won against those people from West Hill on behalf of the Academy. The reason I apologize is actually very simple. It's because I was wrong. I shouldn't have doubted your character before figuring out the truth." Ning Ke laughed and said, "We are all from the military. Don't make it too complicated. Last year you once said that you would give me a chance to correct my name. Although I refused, I know you mean well. As for why I refused at that time, the reason is actually very simple. Because I don't need to correct my name, and my character has never been good." Chang Jingming slightly smiled and stepped aside. Then a few more Academy students came out and seemed to want to follow this wave to apologize to Ning Quebec. Ning Ke didn't see Xie Qingyun, but he saw Zhong Dajuan with a somewhat embarrassed expression and a few grade A dormitory students who made the most noise in the semester exam. He didn't want to waste time on these small things, and he also didn't want these people to lightly say sorry and erase the past 6 months and stories. He was willing to let these people keep this pressure in their heart. He knew it would make these people very unhappy and uncomfortable. Thinking of this, he felt very good and happy. After bidding farewell to Situilan and Chu Yuxian, and nodding to Chang Jingming and those recommended students from the military ministry, he did not even bother to look at the grade A dormitory students and walked out of the academy with Sang Sang. Zhong Dajuan clenched his fists tightly and looked at Ning Ke's back with an ugly expression. He shouted unhappily, "Ning Ke, if you are not willing to accept our apology, I have nothing to say. You did enter the second floor and you defeated Prince Long Qing. You used the truth to humiliate us for misunderstanding you. But are you so intoxicated with the pride of a winner?" Hearing the voices coming from behind, Ning Ke stopped and looked back at Zhong Dajuan and those so-called classmates who seemed to want to apologize but were actually disappointed and unwilling. He said, "First of all, it's not a misunderstanding. Not all accusations of indifference can be explained as a misunderstanding. Maybe you can explain it to others but not to me. I won't accept it. Secondly, you are not worthy of my humiliation. My goal is to enter the second floor. Even Prince Long Qing is not my goal, let alone you. However, since this fact has humiliated you, I will gladly accept this fact. Finally, about pride. Pride is the most precious quality of us Tangs, and I am not proud because I defeated Prince Longqing today and entered the second floor. Last year, Chang Jingming wanted to give me a chance to prove myself, but I refused. I said it was because I did not need it. Why not? In the morning light, Ning Ke held Sang Sang in his arms and proudly looked at his classmates from the academy, who had complicated expressions on their faces. He said, "Because I have always been proud. I didn't suddenly become proud at this moment. It's just that you didn't understand my pride at that time, or even now. You are not good enough to understand it." After saying these words about pride, Ning Ke did not say another word and directly walked out of the academy. The students of the academy stared at his back like birds carved out of wood. Zhong Dajuan's face turned red and he clenched his fists tightly, but he could not say a word. Chang Jingming sighed. Situ Ilan shook her head and smiled bitterly. She thought that since she thought that Ning Ke was not good enough, and he had fallen into the water, why did he have to slap him again before leaving? Walking out of the gate of the academy, Ning Ke saw two people. He respectfully bowed to Professor Huang He, who presided over the ceremony of the second floor on the right side. Professor Huang He smiled at him, as if he was looking at the silver hidden under his bed. He gently stroked his long beard and nodded, which was very comforting. Ning Ke did not know the dirty old Taoist on the left side, but he guessed his identity, so he more respectfully bowed to him. Looking at the clean young man in front of him, Master Yen Sei's triangular eyes were full of brilliance, without the usual wretchedness. He was like an old grandfather who finally held his grandson before his death. He sighed with emotion and said, "I think you have already known the final result. If you have free time in the future, you can follow me to learn some small skills of drawing talismans." The Divine Talisman Master was a great figure in the world. It was really a rare lucky chance to learn talisman Taoism from him. Ning Ke had already known the result of the dispute from Chen Pipi. Hearing Master Yen Sei's words, he could not suppress his excitement anymore. He respectfully bowed again and sincerely said, "It is my honor to learn talisman Taoism from you." Yen Sei sighed and said, "It seems that you have just entered the second floor of the academy, and you have not been affected by the arrogance there. Not bad, not bad." Ning Ke raised his head and looked at the old Taoist, who looked really inelegant. After a moment of hesitation, he could not hold back his curiosity and asked, "Master Yen Sei, I have never met you before. Why are you so sure that I have the potential to cultivate talisman Taoism? Speaking of which, I should not have any doubts to follow you to cultivate talisman Taoism. I just worry that I will let you down in the future." Disappointed? Last year, I saw the note you left in Dewdrop of House of Red Sleeves, so I checked you. At that time, I thought that you could not cultivate, and I was really disappointed. Yen Sei looked at him lovingly and said, "Now you can cultivate and even enter the second floor of the academy. How can I be disappointed? Unless you suddenly forget how to pick up a pen to write." Hearing this, Ning Ke was stunned for a long time. Then he remembered that after drinking in House of Red Sleeves last year, he had some juvenile madness in the name of drunkenness, but there seemed to be nothing special in that note. How could Master Yen Sei see that he had the potential to cultivate talisman Taoism just by that account book? Yen Sei looked at his expression and knew what he was thinking about. He said with a smile, "A thin account book and a few numbers are chicken soup. I can see that you have the potential to be a divine talisman master, but you can't see it yourself. Because you are a student and I am a divine talisman master." Ning Ke understood this sentence and bowed to accept the instruction. "We will talk about these trivial things later. Today, you go back to the Southern Gate Temple with me. There are thousands of talisman Taoism. Now you are just a piece of white paper. If you want to draw the whole world on it, you have to start cultivating from the simplest way. This is a long road and you have to hurry." Hearing Yen Sei's instruction, Ning Ke and Professor Huang He were stunned at the same time and asked in unison, "So urgent?" Master Yen Sei suddenly became silent. The wrinkles on his face showed both the joy of finding a successor and some inexplicable emotions. He glanced at Professor Huang He and then turned to look at Ning Ke quietly. He said slowly, "I am very old." Hearing this, Professor Huang He became serious and slightly bowed his head to give a salute and stepped aside. Ning Ke also heard the sadness, anxiety in this sentence. He did not know why he felt so sad in his heart and nodded. However, at this moment, a voice completely different from the mood in the field came out. Eunuch Lin appeared in the field and looked at several people with a smile. "Master Yen Sei, Ning Ke can't go to the southern gate with you today. He has to go to a place with me." Yen Sei was slightly stunned. Looking at the eunuch in charge, he remembered that this person said yesterday that he came to the academy under the order of His Majesty not to watch the battle, but to pick up a person. Was the person he was going to pick up Ning Ke? Even if the palace wants to see him, it won't be too late. Yen Sei said unhappily, "In order to get this student, I have fought with the academy for a day and a night. I don't know how to explain to my younger brother later. Why are you in such a hurry?" Only the divine talisman master in the southern gate of Haotian could be so indifferent to the request of the palace and dare to scold the powerful eunuch in charge. Eunuch Lin naturally would not get angry. He smiled and replied, "Master Yen has waited for half a day for this student. But you should know that His Majesty has been waiting for him for half a year. His Majesty had been waiting for him for half a year." His words directly made these people at the gate of the academy speechless. On the stone ground, not far away, the students of the academy were still doing their activities after the event. The young students waved their sleeves and thought that what they had done was just a derivative of the misunderstanding, which could be forgiven and should be forgiven. If not forgiven, it must be that Ning Ke was not gentlemanly enough. They looked at Ning Ke's back and complained bitterly about his arrogance and rudeness. Now he was so arrogant because of a little pride. Let's see how long he could be so arrogant. Then they began to criticize Chang Jingming and other recommended students of the military ministry for being humble and apologizing. Obviously they had not apologized yet, but they apologized first. Wouldn't they be very disappointed and stressed if they did not apologize in the end? For Situilan, the beloved daughter of the general's mansion, of course no student dared to make sarcastic remarks, but they inevitably cast some jealous glances at her. Situilan was extremely angry when she heard these comments. But when she saw those students were still secretly concerned about the movement at the gate of the academy and controlled their voices, she laughed out of anger and shook her head speechlessly. At this moment, the gate of the academy suddenly became quiet. The students could not suppress their curiosity and looked over. The reason why they were speechless was that they did not know what Eunuch Lin meant. Why did the Emperor of Tang wait for Ning Ke for half a year? Master Yen Sei knew about it and even proved it himself, but he did not think of it that way. Professor Huang He hid in the academy every day and painstakingly studied, and did not care about the world. Ning Ke and Sang Sang were shocked and confused. After looking at each other, Ning Ke asked carefully, "Eunuch Lin, what do you mean?" Eunuch Lin looked at him with a smile and said, "Did you go to the imperial study one day last spring?" Ever since he entered the academy, Ning Ke had focused all his attention on climbing the stairs and cultivating. He had even forgotten that he was a secret guard of the Tang Empire. As for the calligraphy he had written in the imperial study, he had long forgotten about it. Although the wonderful feeling of catharsis still lingered in his heart, Eunuch Lin's words were like a bolt of lightning that directly awakened all his memories. Although his expression remained calm, his heart was already trembling with shock. He thought to himself, could it be that the palace found out that he had entered the imperial study without permission and decided to punish him? But the meaning of his calligraphy was ancient and completely different from the usual ink. How could the palace be sure that it was him? And even if they wanted to punish him, it should be the bodyguard office's business. How could such a bigwig like Eunuch Lin take action? In a flash, Ning Ke thought of many things. It was said that the emperor was famous for his kindness. Now that he had become a disciple of the second floor of the academy and a student of Master Yensei, and it was said that the South School of Haotian also thought highly of him, he should not be beheaded for such a small crime, right? In a flash, he weighed many problems and finally said honestly, yes. He tried to appear calm and aboveboard, but everyone could hear that his voice was nervous and dry. Eunuch Lin touched his smooth chin and looked at him with a smile. It really is you. That's good. But this is a serious matter. To confirm it before entering the palace, I asked His Majesty a question. Please speak, Eunuch Lin, Ning Ke said. Eunuch Lin looked into his eyes and asked with a smile. His Majesty asked you, what is the sentence before the flower blooms on the shore? Ning Ke murmured, the fish jumps into the sea. Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and follow me into the palace. Eunuch Lin looked at him and said with a smile, My Sir Ning. Because of the silence at the entrance of the academy, the gathered students also quietened down and listened to the discussion curiously. But because of the distance they could not hear clearly and could only hear a few words occasionally floating over. Master Yensei is going to take that lucky guy as a student. What is he still doing there? Which prince's mansion does that eunuch come from? What are they talking about? It seems like they are going to some prince's mansion? A student guessed. Jean Wutsai looked at the royal carriage outside the academy and hesitated. She murmured the word she heard, the sea. The shore? His Majesty has waited for half a year. What does this mean? After sending breakfast to Xie Qingyun, who temporarily stayed in the academy last night, she returned to the gate of the academy and was ready to go home with Situilan. She did not hear the previous apology and proud remarks, but heard the last conversation. Suddenly, an incredible emotion surged in her eyes. Looking at Ning Ke beside the carriage, she murmured in a slightly trembling voice, Is the calligraphy in the imperial study written by Ning Ke? Her voice was very low, but it was clearly heard by the students of the academy. In an instant, the inner stone square fell into absolute silence. Everyone knew that the calligraphy that Jean Wutsai mentioned, which was left in the imperial study by someone, was deeply loved by His Majesty. It was said that His Majesty would go to the imperial study to look at that calligraphy in a daze whenever he was upset about state affairs. What was more clear was that His Majesty had invited many calligraphers to the palace to copy that calligraphy, and then selected the best ones to be bestowed to the ministers and scholars in the imperial court in order to replace those really meaningless rewards in the past. Even in the Tang Empire with simple folk customs, it was the same. His Majesty loved calligraphy, especially the literati and officialdom loved calligraphy. His Majesty loved that calligraphy, so did the ministers and scholars. His Majesty loved that calligraphy, and naturally, the ministers and scholars were not willing to be left behind. This trend became more and more popular, and finally became an interesting thing. Every time the ministers in the imperial court argued about how to get a wife, they would actually talk about this calligraphy. The grand scholar said that the emperor bestowed the first copy to him, and the minister said that the copy the emperor bestowed to him was the most exquisite double-hook copy that had the charm of the original. How could those copies of yours be compared to the one hanging in my study room? The ministers who had seen the blooming on the opposite shore, in the imperial study, all agreed with His Majesty's appreciation. They thought that it was indeed the most charming book in the past 10 years. Even without the blessing of His Majesty's love, it was still a rare masterpiece. In addition, the above-mentioned interesting things, the mysterious calligrapher had not appeared for a long time, and the strange appearance of the calligraphy in the imperial study added a layer of mystery to this calligraphy. Only mystery could be sacred in the world. The calligraphy and the mysterious calligrapher were getting more and more popular, and people were getting more and more curious. Today, the 5 words, "a calligraphy piece moves Chang," and were really extremely appropriate. The students of the academy had also taken great interest in this matter, and the children of powerful officials like Jean Wutsai and Miss Gao even had the opportunity to see those copies with their own eyes. But who would have thought that person was Ning Quebec? Chen Zixian looked at Ning Ke, who was standing beside the royal carriage, and suddenly said timidly, "When we talked about that calligraphy last year, I told you that Ning Ke opened a small calligraphy and painting shop in the eastern city. That calligraphy piece might be written by him." No one answered him. There was a silence on the stone platform, a silence of shock and embarrassment. In fact, there were many students in classroom 3 who remembered the discussion last year. They also remembered how they had mocked and ridiculed Chen Zixian after he had made such a cowardly guess. They had pointed at Chen Zixian's back in the rain-shielding corridor and laughed out loud. But who could still laugh at this moment? Ning Ke, who was regarded as a loser in cultivation and an immoral villain who gave up the exam because he was sick, had successfully climbed the mountain and surpassed those classmates who did not take him seriously. Finally, he defeated the invincible Prince Long Qing. This fact was like a thunder to the students of the academy. The highly respected divine talisman master did not hesitate to cry and shout to accept Ning Ke as a student. This matter was like a second thunder to the students of the academy. After the 2 thunder sounds, most people had been struck silly by the thunder. They could only rely on their survival instinct to force themselves to find the last spiritual escape channel and exit. At this moment, the 3rd thunder sounded. Ning Ke was the calligrapher who wrote the flower blooms on the shore of the opposite shore. He was about to enter the palace to meet the emperor, and he could see a brighter and broader future than most of the people present. After the 3rd thunder, the academy students standing on the stone platform no longer had any reason to continue to be proud, indifferent, innocent, argue, question, or refuse. They were directly struck into countless silent scorched trees, with smoke rising from their heads and their clothes turning into black brittle pieces. Their brains had long stopped working. The louder they had laughed, the hotter their faces were now. The more exaggerated they had laughed, the more they wanted to dig a big hole in front of them. The more indifferent they used to be, the more humiliated they could not control their eyes and looked at the royal carriage. I once heard Ning Ke say a very new word. Sidhu Ilan suddenly said faintly, "That word is aesthetic fatigue. I have never understood how to judge beauty and then how to feel tired. Today I finally understand the meaning of this sentence. It is easy to become numb and boring to be shocked too much." Chu Yuxian stood behind her, shaking his head and saying with a smile, "But I still feel very good." Sidhu Ilan laughed and waved her fist. She looked at the academy students around her and said, "It is indeed very good." She looked at Zhong Dajuan, whose face was pale. Zhong Dajuan subconsciously turned his face away and did not dare to look back. She looked at the student from Yangguan beside Zhong Dajuan and said, "I remember someone once said that if that calligraphy was written by Ning Ke, he would be willing to kiss Ning Ke's smelly feet." The student was terrified and kept retreating. Sidhu Ilan smiled and said, "I can ask Ning Ke to throw his shoes over. After climbing the mountain for a day and a night they should be very smelly." The student screamed and then fell straight down. He had actually fainted because of this sentence. 4 horse carriages sped along the straight and spacious streets of Chang'an. From time to time, the shouts of the bodyguards could be heard. The pedestrians all moved away and then cursed at the dust on the road. The Tang Empire had always been particular about rules. Although they clearly saw that it was a carriage from the palace, the people of Chang'an city did not show any mercy to such an unruly carriage. Ning Ke and Sang Sang sat in the dim carriage and were a little bewildered by the luxurious decorations in the carriage. They looked at each other from time to time and exchanged their feelings. Both master and servant had seen many big scenes and large amounts of money. However, sitting in the royal carriage and officially entering the palace to meet His Majesty, they still could not help but feel a little nervous. Don't be nervous. His Majesty loves your calligraphy very much. Eunuch Lin looked at him and comforted him. They had just left the back of the mountain of the academy and then entered the palace. It was indeed difficult for Ning Ke to wake up in a short time. After hesitating for a moment, he asked with uncertainty, "Eunuch Lin, are you sure that His Majesty really likes my calligraphy and summoned me to the palace and not for other reasons?" Eunuch Lin was startled and did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Your flower blooms on the shore has already caused such a stir in Chang'an City. Did you really not know?" Ning Ke finally relaxed and said with a smile, "Apart from cultivation, what I like the most is promotion and wealth. If I had known that His Majesty liked my calligraphy and was still looking for me, I would have walked right into the trap. No, I would have brought the most wonderful calligraphy I have ever written and barged into the imperial city, shouting that it was me, it was me. Haha, I'm just afraid that I would be beaten back by the guards." Eunuch Lin laughed and looked at him meaningfully. He said, "If you could really barge into the imperial city with your calligraphy, the Yulin royal guards would definitely not let you in. However, why would the guards beat you?" Ning Ke's heart skipped a beat. Eunuch Lin looked at him with a smile and said, "You entered the palace and the imperial study without permission. Do you think that the palace would not investigate this matter and let His Majesty see you? I know that you are a secret guard and I also know your relationship with Chao Shaoshu." Ning Ke was speechless. Eunuch Lin sighed and said, "Although the eastern city is a poor place and people rarely talk about these things, since you are the owner of a painting and calligraphy shop, you should know about the discussions among your peers. I really don't know what you have been doing for the past year. I rarely interact with my peers. As for the past half a year, I have been busy studying." Ning Ke thought of the leaves, silver ingots, and brush and ink in the old brush pen shop and smiled. Suddenly, he remembered an important matter and his smile disappeared. He asked Eunuch Lin to return to Lin 47th Street to wash up. Hearing this request, Eunuch Lin was extremely displeased. His Majesty had waited for you for half a year, but you were not in a hurry to thank him. Instead, you were in a hurry to go home and wash up. What was the meaning of this? Did I not explain the rules clearly to you before? The palace would naturally let you wash up before the audience. However, for some reason, Ning Ke was exceptionally stubborn and insisted on returning to Lin 47th Street. Eunuch Lin was helpless against his argument. Thinking that His Majesty admired this young student so much and did not want to make things too awkward, he agreed to his request. Lin 47th Street was exceptionally beautiful in spring. A few peach blossoms poked out of the wall of the Ministry of Revenue's warehouse and looked curiously at the shop across the street. At dusk yesterday, the Nation Master of Tang, Li Qingshan, and the others personally came to Lin 47th Street to examine Ning Ke's handwriting. At that time, they had entered violently and the door of the old brush pen shop was forcefully pushed down. The scene was a mess. Ning Ke looked at the open door and secretly cursed in his heart. He jumped off the horse carriage and rushed inside. The proprietress of the fake antique shop next to him shouted, "Don't worry, nothing is missing. I helped you look after it all night." Ning Ke looked back at the proprietress and felt that the thick layer of makeup on her face had made her more beautiful than ever. He went forward and gave her the warmest hug. He said joyfully, "Aunt Wu, thank you so much, thank you so much." The owner of the fake antique shop stood at the door with a teapot in his hand. Seeing this scene, he said unhappily, "Don't hug me even if you're grateful. That's my wife." Ning Ke laughed and said, "Of course I know she's your wife, and your only wife." The owner of the fake antique shop smiled proudly and took a sip of tea. He said, "Who can tell? The proprietress was about to lose her temper, but Ning Ke stopped her and said with a smile, "Aunt Wu, don't worry. I owe you a favor today. Second brother Wu will never marry another wife in this life. I'll look after him for you." The proprietress beamed and repeatedly agreed. Second brother Wu said angrily, "You little thing, how dare you meddle in my family affairs?" Ning Ke pointed at the royal horse carriage behind him and asked with a smile, "Can you meddle in this?" Second brother Wu saw the emblem on the bright yellow horse carriage clearly and thought of his miserable life in the future. He suddenly trembled with fear. Walking into the dark old brush pen shop, Ning Ke did not ask Sang Sang to boil water for a bath. Instead, he reluctantly closed the shop door and climbed up the wall on the stool as fast as he could. He took down the scrolls hanging on the wall with his own handwriting. He solemnly handed the scrolls to Sang Sang and said with a solemn expression, "From now on, you must take care of any piece of paper I write as if it were a big black umbrella." Sang Sang opened her eyes and asked confusedly, "As long as the paper exists, I will exist. If the paper dies, I will die?" "This is not a piece of paper." Ning Ke gently stroked the scrolls in Sang Sang's hands and said with a slightly trembling voice, "These are all silver notes. I like the content of the second half of the chapter, and I especially like the title. Also, I have something to report to everyone. Jiang Ye's book always sends out individual chapters to solicit votes at midnight on Monday. This good habit will be maintained. It's just that some of my friends are very generous and use text messages to notify me. I'm very grateful. But the chapter at midnight is a chapter for soliciting vote. Please don't get up to read it, or I'll be very embarrassed. I'm cupping my hands. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 163. The hollow wooden door with flower patterns opened slowly. The little eunuch flicked his horsetail whisk and left quietly. Ning Ke looked at the high threshold in front of him and was startled. He tidied up his appearance and entered solemnly. He looked at the precious brushes and inkstones that he had not seen for a long time and smelled the smell of mud ink that had been hidden deep in his memory. He thought of what had happened in this door last year and could not help but feel a little lost. A middle-aged man stood in front of the bookshelf with his back to the main door of the imperial study. The man wore a plain thin cotton shirt and a black and gold belt around his waist. He looked slightly thin. Although his face could not be seen, Ning Ke could easily guess his identity. Without the guidance of the eunuch, he did not know whether he should kneel down or bow with his hands folded in front. Logically speaking, it should be the former, but few Tangs were willing to stain their knees with dirt, so he was a little hesitant and embarrassed. The middle-aged man suddenly spoke at this time. His light and gentle tone and the content of his words relieved Ning Ke's embarrassment and hesitation in time. He said, "This is not a worship ceremony. Don't think of kneeling down so easily." It was just a simple sentence, but Ning Ke had a very strong good impression of this middle-aged man. In his imagination, the image of the domineering Tang Emperor had always been associated with dignified, indifferent and solemn words. He did not expect the man to be so gentle. "I heard that you are my secret guard?" The middle-aged man took out an old book from the bookshelf and asked casually while reading it. Ning Ke bowed deeply and replied, "Yes. This secret guard is too secretive. Even I don't know about it." The middle-aged man smiled and took out a bookmark from the edge of the bookshelf. He clipped it to the old book as a mark and suddenly asked, "How did you enter this room last year?" Ning Ke was thinking about how to address himself at this time. He wandered between lowly civilian student and lowly official for a moment and naturally excluded lowly official first. After hearing the question, he subconsciously answered, "I entered the palace for an errand and was brought here to wait." The middle-aged man made a sound of surprise and seemed to be a little confused about something. After a moment of silence, he said, "Since you were on an errand, how did you enter my imperial study? Did anyone see you come in at that time?" At this point in the conversation, Ning Ke felt a little less nervous, but more confused. On the way into the palace, he had imagined the scene when he saw the emperor. In his imagination, he had thought that after the emperor saw him, the emperor would laugh with great joy, take a few steps forward, and pretend to be displeased to hold his hands to stop him from kneeling. Then, the emperor would let go of his hands and gently stroke his beard. Looking at his fresh and cute face, the emperor would nod repeatedly, his face full of praise. He would forcefully suppress his excitement and say, "Minister Ning, you have made me look for death. I will reward you with thousands of acres of fertile land and countless beautiful maids. As for official positions in court, you can choose." However, this was not the case. The fact proved that although Ning Ke was not as beautiful as Prince Longqing, he would still think too well when he was in a state of excitement and worry about personal gains and losses. Ning Ke was a little disappointed and confused when he heard the emperor's last question. He suddenly understood something. Last year, it was the little eunuch named Lu Ji who arranged for him to come to the imperial study. Since the emperor had been looking for him for half a year and the painting, "The Flower Blooms on the Shore," had caused an uproar in the court, there was no reason for the little eunuch named Lu Ji and Commander Su Chongshan not to connect this matter with him. His Majesty did not find him, which could only mean one thing. Whether it was Commander Su Chongshan or the little eunuch named Lu Ji, they did not report to His Majesty that he had entered the imperial study. As for why they did not report it, there could be many reasons. For example, they had forgotten, or they were idiots, or they were worried about what kind of trouble this matter would bring. Ning Ke did not know the reason at this time, but he was clear that if his answer did not match the answer of Commander Su and the little eunuch, it would bring them a lot of trouble, or even trouble himself. Therefore, he frowned and thought seriously for a moment. Then, he shook his head and said sincerely, "No one should know." The emperor listened to the answer coming from behind and laughed loudly. He put the old book in his hand back to the bookshelf and turned to look at the young student at the door of the imperial study. He sighed and said, "You really have a good character. No wonder second brother Chao thinks highly of you." Ning Ke looked at the bookshelf and found that the man was just an ordinary middle-aged man with white hair. He was not as majestic as he had imagined, and his aura was even more terrifying than that of the vermilion bird. Moreover, looking at the man's expression and smile, Ning Ke knew that his answer was right, although he did not know why he was right. The emperor looked at Ning Ke and suddenly waved his hand. He smiled and said, "Come here." Looking at the smile on the emperor's face, Ning Ke's heart slightly tightened. He forcibly suppressed his nervousness and walked over. The emperor pointed at the piece of calligraphy on the table and asked with a smile, "Did you write this?" Ning Ke glanced at it with the corner of his eyes and looked at the 5 big words on the yellow bud paper. He instantly recalled the pride and joy he felt after he finished writing it last year. He replied softly, "It is indeed my absurd work that day." "It is not absurd at all." The emperor looked at him with a smile and said, "I like your calligraphy very much." Finally, the process of praise and appreciation began. Ning Ke suddenly found that he did not know how to respond. It was probably because the emperor's tone was too natural and casual when he said it. There was only calm appreciation and no visible excitement. It was as if he was saying that the empress had peeled the green onions last night and baked the flatbread was very fragrant. How could he be moved? His Majesty obviously did not expect Ning Ke to be moved to tears by his words. He gently stroked his long beard and looked at the 5 characters on the table. After admiring it for a while, he sighed and said, "It's been so hard for me to find you." The emperor had been addressing himself as I before. Now that he suddenly changed to I, the atmosphere in the imperial study suddenly changed. Moreover, the strong meaning hidden in this sentence was many times stronger than the previous one. It had changed from a very distant elegance to a very strong appreciation. Ning Ke was not used to the former, and did not know how to respond to the latter. The Emperor looked at him with a smile and suddenly said, "The fish jumps in this sea, the flower blooms on the other shore." You only wrote the last sentence, and I always feel that it is a pity. Since I have found you today, why don't you finish the 2 sentences? How about I grind the ink for you? To let the Emperor of the Tang Empire grind the ink, spread the brush, lay the paper and stamp the seal was undoubtedly the highest treatment for those who loved calligraphy. In fact, it was a treatment that they did not even dare to think about. Compared with this treatment, even if you put all the popular girls in the House of Red Sleeves into the study to add incense and grind the ink, it would not be worth mentioning. Ning Ke was shocked when he heard this. He sincerely declined. How can I do that? As for the fish jumps in this sea couplets, they were originally obtained by your majesty. I am just a transcriber. If I write it again today, your majesty is right in front of me, how would I dare to write it on your behalf? He had been wandering from place to place since he was a child, struggling to survive at the bottom of the Tang Empire. He did not have much experience in interacting with the nobles. On the journey back from the grassland, he could hang out with Li Yu, the princess of the Tang Empire. That was because Li Yu was a delicate little maidservant. Although he knew Li Yu's identity, he had always insisted on treating Li Yu as a maidservant in order to make himself more relaxed. But now he was facing the most powerful man in the world. How should he get along with him? If it were any other inexperienced young man, he would probably be in a mess in the imperial study today. But Ning Ke was still Ning Ke after all. He was able to survive in the dangerous world when he was still a child. In addition to the chopper at his waist and the courage to kill, his mouth was sweeter than honey, and his ability to wag his tail and beg for mercy was also indispensable. As for pleasing the superiors and flattering the nobles, as long as he was willing to do it, he could do it better than anyone else. When he was in the city of Wei, he was a young soldier from outside the city. He was able to win the favor of the soldiers and the people in the city. He was able to make several generals in the city of Wei dote on him as if he was their nephew. It was easy for him to use this ability to flatter His Majesty. His Majesty was slightly taken aback when he heard Ning Ke's words. He couldn't help but raise his head to look at Ning Ke's face and chastised him with a smile. Your flattery is a bit too stiff. Everyone in the world knows that my handwriting is terrible. How can I be worthy of the words precious? Not to mention in front of you. Ning Ke chuckled. He was very thick-skinned and did not care about the reprimand. He had seen His Majesty's handwriting with his own eyes. It was indeed not good. But so what? No matter how stiff the flattery was, it was still flattery. Even if His Majesty knew that his handwriting was terrible, he would still feel happy to be praised by others, not to mention by me. Looking at Ning Ke's indifferent expression, His Majesty indeed felt a little happy. He thought to himself that although the calligrapher he had chosen was much younger than he had imagined, his eyes were really sharp and unique. His evaluation was most likely to be flattering him, but seeing how natural and sincere he was, perhaps the remaining 20 to 30% meant that His Majesty's handwriting had indeed improved a lot, or was it rather impressive? Let's cut the chatter. Since I have finally caught you, you have to write a few pieces of calligraphy tonight and let me have a good look. Your Majesty, I have used up too much energy in the academy last night. My body is also a little weak. I really can't write anything good. It's not that I dare to go against your Majesty's will. It's just that writing is all about the spirit. His Majesty's face turned a little ugly. But he thought that what Ning Ke said did make sense. He was very clear about how difficult it was to enter the second floor of the academy. Moreover, He thought that the lad in front of him could actually defeat Long Qing and enter the second floor of the academy. He would definitely be a pillar of the empire in the future. He was afraid that Ning Ke would be very ambitious. If he only treated him as a calligrapher and an official, he was afraid that Ning Ke would feel a little humiliated. Ning Ke said as he secretly looked at His Majesty's face. Suddenly, like a magic trick, he took out a few scrolls from his sleeves and respectfully placed them on the desk. Your Majesty, these are the writings that I have been practicing calligraphy in recent years. I have picked some that are acceptable. Your Majesty, please point them out. Hearing this, His Majesty looked at the scrolls on the desk. His eyes suddenly brightened. He quickly bent down and stretched out his hand to flatten the scrolls. Then, he looked at the lines and scribbles on the scrolls and fell into a long silence. After a long time, a joyful exclamation finally broke the silence in the imperial study. His Majesty shook his head and exclaimed in surprise, "Good writing! Really, really good writing!" He turned around and looked at Ning Ke with his eyes shining. He said, "Minister Ning, I heard that you have opened a shop in the eastern city of Chang'an. I believe that the works that you have made over the years must be more than these scrolls. Bring them quickly and let me have a good look." Ning Ke was stunned. Facing His Majesty's eager eyes, he awkwardly replied, "Your Majesty, the scrolls that I have written, that, basically, are used to sell for money." Not far from the south gate of the majestic imperial city, there was a quiet Taoist temple hidden among the green trees. It was where the south gate of Haotian Taoism was located. In the deepest hall of the south gate temple, Yen Sei, the divine talisman master who had been heroic in the academy and wanted to compete with second brother, now seemed to have become a child who had done something wrong. He sat cross-legged on the dark-colored wooden floor. The beard under his chin was scorched as if it had been burned. His eyes were no longer wretched and innocently stared at the floor in front of him. He did not dare to look at the opposite side. However, although he did not dare to look at the opposite side, the dense wrinkles on his face were already full of guilt and flattery. Li Qingshan, the master of nation of Tang, looked at his senior brother in front of him. His eyes were as gloomy as a resentful woman in the palace. The respect he had for his senior brother had completely turned into disappointment and anger. Ning Ke can't enter the South School of Haotian Taoism. This means that although he is your student, the South School of Haotian Taoism will not have its own divine talisman master after you die. This also means that after we die, no one can support the South School. Master Yen Sei raised his head and looked at his junior brother with a silly smile. He comforted him and said, "It is not so serious. Since Ning Ke is my student, if he becomes a divine talisman master in the future, he can't just watch the South School be in trouble. Besides, although I am old and dying, junior brother, you are still young. Maybe when you die, Ning Ke will already be dead. In this case, what is the use of him?" Li Qingshan looked at his senior brother expressionlessly. After a long silence, he sighed and shook his head. He said, "Senior brother, do you really not know the difference between the two? If Ning Ke enters the South School, I will let him be the master of the South School in the future. He will be the master of nation of Tang. The South School can't be weakened even if it wants to. But if he is only your student, he can only be a visiting professor of the South School in the future. But what is the use of being a visiting professor? Liu Bai from the South Jin Kingdom is also a visiting professor of the West Hill Divine Palace. But when did you see Liu Bai risking his life for the Divine Hall?" Yen Sei agreed to the request of the second brother of the academy to accept Ning Ke as a talisman Taoism student in his own name, but completely cut off the possibility of Ning Ke entering the South School of Haotian Taoism. He was ashamed in his heart and felt a little ashamed when he came back to face Li Qingshan. At this time, Li Qingshan's words became more and more serious, which made him even more embarrassed. At last, he did not dare to look at Li Qingshan's resentful eyes and walked away awkwardly with his face covered. All the way through the trees and corridors, the disciples of the South School of Haotian Taoism, Taoist boys and Taoist nuns, respectfully saluted and avoided. Master Yen Sei did not want to show his kind and lecherous side at all today. He hurried forward with a livid face. He gave up the main door and went straight to the side door. When he pushed the side door open and walked into the side alley, he reached out to brush off the green leaves on his shoulder. His wrinkled old face finally returned to normal. Although he felt sorry for the South School, he finally found a successor. Yen Sei was ashamed, but in fact he could not suppress the joy in his heart. Previously in the South School, in front of the master of nation Li Qingshan, the joy was covered by shame. Now in the side alley, he finally began to show it. A carriage blocked the entrance of the alley. Looking at the emblem of a marquis's mansion on the shaft, he was slightly stunned. A man who looked like a steward jumped out of the carriage and looked at Master Yen Sei up and down. It seemed that he was a little confused about the appearance of this old Taoist. After a long time, he remembered the earnest instructions of his master. He smiled humbly and said sincerely, "Greetings to Master Yen Sei. I am the steward of the Annal Marquis's mansion. Today I come to you by the order of the Marquis. I heard that you have a copybook in your hand." Master Yen Sei stared at the steward's face coldly. He did not bother to think about the other's purpose and directly said in a cold voice, "Get out." After saying this word, he directly pushed the steward away and proudly walked to the entrance of the alley. The steward of the Marquis's mansion looked extremely terrible behind him. However, thinking of Yen Sei's high status as a divine talisman master, he did not dare to have any complaints. He just kept following Yen Sei's footsteps and cried, "Master, please let me finish my words." An old voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. "What kind of person is Master Yen Sei? What kind of person are you?" No matter what Marquis Annal wants to ask Master Yen Sei, or invite him into the Marquis's mansion, or come to meet him solemnly, they all have to show the courtesy of a junior. But you, a steward, actually came to meet him. The Marquis is too impulsive. The steward of the Marquis's mansion did not dare to provoke a divine talisman master, but it did not mean that there were many people in Chang, a city that he did not dare to provoke. Listening to the seemingly exhortation but actually undisguised provocation, he became angry. He walked out of the alley and looked at the white-haired old man standing beside a green bamboo chair. He waved his hand and scolded, "What kind of person am I?" Suddenly his body became stiff and his voice trembled. He hurriedly knelt on one knee to salute and said, "I am not worthy of your concern. I am extremely confused. I will go back and tell the Marquis's words to the Marquis." The white-haired old man faintly looked at the steward of the Marquis's mansion kneeling in front of him, waved his hand and said, "I did not expect that you have such good adaptability. You are a qualified steward of the Marquis's mansion." The old man's surname was Wang and his name was Shurchen. He was the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Library of the Tang Empire. He had been in power for 3 dynasties and was highly respected by His Majesty. Even Princely Peiyan had to pay respect to this old man, not to mention Marquis Annal. Although the steward of the Marquis's mansion did not know why this Grand Secretary Wang appeared outside the alley of the Southern Gate Temple, he dared not to say more. He repeatedly saluted to the 2 old men and then fled with his carriage like the wind. Master Yen Sei frowned and looked at Grand Secretary Wang. He cupped his hands and asked, "Old scholar, today is the holiday and there is no need to go to the court. Why are you here? It is not a good reason to go out of the palace. I quarreled with the old chancellor a few days ago. Is this reason enough?" Grand Secretary Wang coughed twice and replied. Yen Sei thought for a while and said angrily, "You quarreled last winter. How could it be a few days ago?" Anyway, the double-hook copy of The Flower Blooms on the Shore is in that old guy's mansion. That old guy not only doesn't let me see it, but also often annoys me with this matter. Grand Secretary Wang could not hide his anger. He stroked his beard and said angrily, "The double-hook copy is too rigid in the original meaning of the lines. It has the original shape but no meaning. How can it be better than the copy that His Majesty gave me? What you're saying is unreasonable." Yen Sei knew this case well. He shook his head and said, "Everyone knows that if you want to copy the original meaning of the original, the double-hook method is certainly the best way." Yen Sei was the only divine talisman master in the South School of Haotian. Wang Shichen was a senior who had experienced 3 dynasties. They were familiar with each other for decades and had a common identity, that was, they were great calligraphers in the world. At this time, when it came to the method of copying, they naturally would not give way. Even if the double-hook copy is the best. Wang Shichen smiled slightly and said proudly, "So what? When I take the chicken soup calligraphy back today, I will hang it in the central hall instead of the study. That old guy will be annoyed." "Wait," Yen Sei said strangely, "what is the chicken soup calligraphy?" "It's the account paper that you took from the House of Red Sleeves." Grand Secretary Wang looked at him with a serious expression and said, "Now the news has spread. Those calligraphy sections that were sold by the old brush pen shop in Eastern City have been taken away. I don't think those sections have any special meaning, but this chicken soup calligraphy is quite different. You concluded that Ning Ke has the potential to be a divine talisman master based on this chicken soup calligraphy. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could keep this calligraphy in my house?" Yen Sei sighed and said, "This rumor really spreads faster than talisman books." Grand Secretary Wang stared at him and said, "Let's cut to the chase. Anil Marquis is extremely stupid. He actually sent a steward to ask for it from you. I am a Grand Secretary of 3 dynasties. I personally come to the alley to stop you and ask for your student's calligraphy section. This is already giving you enough face. Don't say that you don't want to give me face. Otherwise, both of us will lose face. I only hear the aura of an old hooligan from your words. I don't think you want to save face at all." Yen Sei said angrily, "You and I have known each other for decades. I can't believe that you, a Grand Secretary of 3 dynasties, would be disturbed by such a small thing." Grand Secretary Wang said angrily, "If it's something else, it's fine. But the Flower Blooms calligraphy has caused too much trouble in Chang'an this year. That old man bullied me too much. If I can't get back my face, how can I, a Grand Secretary of 3 dynasties, have a foothold in the imperial court?" Yen Sei looked at him and suddenly said, 10,000. The anger on Grand Secretary Wang's face suddenly disappeared. He laughed and said, 4,000. Yen Sei took out the thin account paper from his sleeve and handed it over. He said, "Deal." Grand Secretary Wang took the thin paper. Without even looking at it, he turned around and sat back on the green bamboo chair. He shouted to his entourage, "What are you waiting for? Go back quickly. Invite the best Master Xing from the Bao Rong store to the mansion. Then ask the 3rd brother to prepare a banquet tomorrow to celebrate the birthday and invite the guests to appreciate the chicken soup calligraphy." The green bamboo chair rushed away with the wind and dust, and the conversation between the Grand Secretary and the steward could be faintly heard. "Old master, your 80th birthday has passed last month." "Idiot. The eldest brother's 2nd daughter is celebrating her birthday this month. Invite that little girl, Jean Wutsai, as well. Most importantly, don't forget to invite her old grandpa as well. If he doesn't come, I'll go and invite him myself." At this time, Ning Ke was nervously meeting the emperor in the imperial palace, looking for every opportunity to flatter the emperor. He didn't know that the note he wrote last year after drinking had been sold for 2,000 taels of silver, and it was only a friendship price. As for Sang Sang, who had never had the chance to see the note. She was nervous and speechless in the old brush pen shop on Lynn 47th Street. Listening to the continuous knocks on the door, looking at the stewards of various manners who were waving the notes anxiously through the crack of the door, and the people who were excitedly discussing on the opposite side of the street, the little handmaiden didn't know how to deal with the situation at all. Thinking of the young master's instructions before he left, she tidied up all the calligraphy she had collected, opened the bedboard, took out the box, and put it neatly together with the precious notes. Then she took 2 extremely thick iron chains and locked all the doors and windows. After doing these things, she walked back to the front of the shop and nailed the door that was difficult to close with a big iron nail. Only then did she feel a little relieved. Ignoring the waves of noise outside, she wiped the beads of sweat on her forehead, and carried the big black umbrella and a few of the most important things that Ning Kei had told her. She opened the back door of the small courtyard and quietly slipped out. It was still early at this time, and it was time for lunch. When Sang Sang walked into the brothel of House of Red Sleeves, she didn't see any scene of flirting, but only smelled countless delicious food and wine. She couldn't help swallowing her saliva as she had not eaten for a day and a night. Mistress Jian's personal handmaiden, Xiao Chao, was holding the railing on the top floor and staring blankly down. Suddenly seeing Sang Sang appear in the building, she was immediately overjoyed and rushed down as fast as she could. She held Song Song's hands with both hands and complained, "Why haven't you come these days? Did your young master forbid you from leaving? Ning Kei is such a person." Mistress Jian didn't let him come to these brothels because she wanted him to focus on his studies. How dare he vent his anger on you? Also, I heard that you have been to the princess's mansion as a guest for half a year. Are you so used to seeing noble people that you have forgotten us frivolous friends? Sang Sang didn't have time to listen to Xiao Cao's complaints. At this time, she had to race against time with all the people in Chang and who heard the news. She directly asked, "When my young master was drunk last year, he once wrote a memo here. Where is it?" Xiao Chao was slightly startled and immediately said, "I'll ask for you." After a moment, Xiao Chao ran back and said, "I've asked. It seems that Sister Dewdrop took it away at that time. Why are you looking for it? It has been so long, who knows where it has been thrown away." Chao Yuning always had some confidence in speaking in Chang, and because his brother-in-law was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works. Since the minister of the Ministry of Works was vacant at the end of last year, his brother-in-law was regarded as the next minister of the Ministry of Works. However, things suddenly changed at the beginning of this spring. A high-ranking official who returned from the River Transport Governor Mansion became a strong competitor of his brother-in-law. His Majesty had been silent about this appointment, and the Prime Minister and those Grand Secretaries had not made up their minds. In such a tense and critical moment, his brother-in-law became more and more low-key and silent. Therefore, Chao Yuning's confidence in speaking in Chang and became weaker and weaker. Especially at this moment, when he was facing the most popular girl in the House of Red Sleeves, Dewdrop, his tone could no longer be described as low-key. He even sounded a little humble. "I say, good girl, please do me a favor and let me have that invitation card." Chao Yuning looked at the plump girl in the chair. If it was any other day, he would have been swayed and wanted to pounce on her. However, his mind was occupied by that matter today, and he couldn't care about this at all. He said sincerely, "The student you mentioned just now is the owner of the Blooming Flowers calligraphy in the palace. His Majesty has confirmed his identity and is talking to him in the imperial study now. If I lie to you, I can probably save some money. However, you and I are acquaintances, and he will not treat you like this. Dewdrop, you can't treat me like this either." Dewdrop had already woken up from the previous shock. She rubbed her forehead with a headache and said helplessly, "But the account paper." Chao Yuning corrected her seriously, "Not the account paper. The news from the Southern Gate Temple has spread all over Chang'an. Now everyone knows about that calligraphy. That calligraphy should be called chicken soup calligraphy. Dewdrop waved her hand helplessly and said, "All right, I'll do as you say." But that chicken soup calligraphy is really not in my hand. After I took it back that day, it was taken away by someone that night. Who took it? Chow Yuning asked nervously. Miss, you have to recall carefully. You should know that this calligraphy is extraordinary. The Minister of Offerings at the Southern Gate judged that Ning Ke had the potential to be a divine talisman master based on this calligraphy. This calligraphy will definitely become a famous calligraphy in the world in the future. Dewdrop snappily smiled and said, "There's no need to recall carefully. That old Taoist was a dirty mess with a weird temperament, but he was generous. How could I forget such a regular customer?" Hearing her description, Chow Yuning was stunned for a while. Then he suddenly slapped his thigh and said in shock, "Oh, my little ancestor! That's not a dirty Taoist. That Taoist must be the divine talisman master Yen Sei." Dewdrop was shocked. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief, and could not say anything for a long time. She thought to herself, what's wrong with this world? How could it become so absurd in one day? That adorable lad turned out to be the calligrapher that His Majesty had been looking for half a year. And that wretched and dirty Taoist, who would come to drink and have fun every other month, was actually a divine talisman master. Suddenly, she thought of something and stood up in surprise. She ordered the maidservant to carry out a small abandoned table from the back of the house. "Look at this table. On it is the dirty Taoist. No, it is Master Yen Sei, the Minister of Offerings of the South School of Haotian Taoism, the only remaining divine talisman master and the senior brother of the nation master. He used all his skills to copy the chicken soup calligraphy on this table." She wiped off the dust on the table with her hand and looked at the scribbled handwriting. She felt that she was really a great judge of character and had great foresight. While admiring herself, she said a long paragraph of words without pause. Chow Yuning put his face close to the table and stared at the scribbled handwriting. His eyes gradually brightened and he said joyfully, "Miss Dewdrop, you can name your price. You don't have to say these words to make the atmosphere better." Dewdrop covered her mouth with a handkerchief and giggled. She said without any embarrassment, 3,000 taels. Chow Yuning straightened up and said resolutely, "Deal." "No." The door of the courtyard was suddenly pushed open. Sang Sang and Xiao Chao walked in quickly. Chow Yuning asked in surprise, "Why not?" Sang Sang took a careful look at the handwriting on the table and said to Dewdrop seriously, "Sell the rubbings. Take advantage of the fact that you are rarely diligent recently and continue to call for recommendation vote. It is rare to fall to the third place of the weekly ranking list. Please support, encourage and cherish it. To be continued." If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for recommendation votes and monthly vote. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 164. Hearing this, Chow Yuning's expression suddenly changed. Although it would look weird to bring a table to the Grand Secretary's mansion, no matter how it was packaged, it was a unique thing in the world after all. But the rubbing, as long as there was ink and paper, it could be made into hundreds or thousands of rubbing. If he really took this rubbing back, how could he explain it to his brother-in-law? He looked at the little handmaiden who came in without being invited and said with a dark face, "Who are you?" Dewdrop glanced at him and knew what he wanted to do. She smiled helplessly and said, "The table you want to buy, although it was written by that Master Yen Sei, is Ning Ke's original work. This girl is Ning Ke's personal handmaiden, and to be honest, I'm afraid that she can take half of Ning Ke's house. If you really want to take something back, you'd better be polite." Chow Yuning was shocked and quickly went along with the flow. He bowed to Sang Sang politely and sincerely said what he came for. "Little girl, although the rubbing will be precious in the future, I want to buy something unique. Sang Sang thought that this was the first guest of her young master after he became famous, so she should have some preferential treatment. After thinking for a moment, she calmly said, I'll give you a seal. If it's still not enough, my young master will ask Master Yen Sei to sign this rubbing. After saying this, she took a long time to take out a seal from her arms. Chao Yuning looked at the seal in her hand with his eyes shining and asked, This is Mr. Ning's private seal? Sang Sang was not used to her young master being called Mr. Ning. She always felt that it was too similar to Mistress Jian. She frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, Chao Yuning put forward his own conditions. Can you guarantee that you will only give me a seal? Sang Sang nodded. Chao Yuning looked up at her eyes and said, Please state your price. Sang Sang said, 300 taels. Chao Yuning exchanged 3 banknotes for a piece of paper and a bright red seal. He left the small courtyard with some joy and disappointment. Dewdrop and Sang Sang watched his back disappear at the door and then looked at each other. Xiao Xiao giggled as she hugged Dewdrop's plump arm. She shook it as she said, Sister Dewdrop, just smear some ink on it, wrap it in cotton, and you'll be able to exchange it for 300 taels of silver. You'll be rich this time. Dewdrop answered with a smile, Only the first one with Ning Kei's private seal is worth this price. But I can print them as I please. Xiao Xiao counted on her fingers and said, This business is much more profitable than dancing and singing. Dewdrop smiled and did not answer. She picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip. Then she continued to look at Sang Sang. During this period of time, Sang Sang did not do anything but quietly looked at Dewdrop. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became a little strange. Dewdrop put down the teacup slowly and looked up at Sang Sang with a smile. 73. You get 70 and I get 30. Sang Sang hurried to the House of Red Sleeves today because Ning Kei specifically asked her to find the chicken soup calligraphy. But she did not expect that she was too late. Not to mention that the original calligraphy had been taken away by Master Yen Sei. Even the handwriting left on the table had begun to be regarded by Dewdrop as a way to make money. She had been quietly watching Dewdrop to see how she would deal with this matter. Sang Sang felt very satisfied when she heard the words You get 70, and I get 30, and I get 30. She smiled and nodded to Dewdrop. Dewdrop lifted her sleeves to cover her lips and smiled. She said softly, with an old table, I can easily surpass Lu Shui. When you bring Ning Kei here, I'll make him happy even if I'm punished by Mistress Jian. Sang Sang smiled and did not answer this topic. She walked to the table and looked over curiously. When she entered the courtyard, she just glanced at it roughly. This was the first time for her to see the original text of the chicken soup calligraphy. She saw that this sentence, which made her young master noticed by a divine talisman master and had become famous in the capital city, was written as follows. Young Master Sang Sang, I'm drunk today, so I won't come back to sleep. Remember to drink the chicken soup left in the pot. Looking at the first 2 characters on the table, which was her own name, Sang Sang was silent for a long time. Then she smiled, and her slightly dark cheeks were full of pride and happiness. After Sang Sang left the courtyard accompanied by Xiao Xiao, Dewdrop's personal maidservant came in. She rolled her eyes and said in a low voice, Miss, although the note was indeed written by Ning Kei, that table belongs to us. Moreover, Master Yen Sei was interested in spending the night with you. It's reasonable to give him and his maidservant some dividends, but the ratio of 70 to 30 is really a little unfair. Dewdrop smiled and gently poked the eyebrows of the loyal maidservant. She said, You always look at things in such a shallow way. Not to mention that the first 2 characters on the table are Sang Sang's name. If I take the biggest share, how can I refuse any high-ranking official in the imperial court who wants to ask for it in the future? Now the biggest share belongs to Ning Kei and his maidservant, and I'm just a temporary manager. If anyone dares to ask for this small table by force, they won't come for me. They have to go through Ning Kei first. The maidservant was slightly startled, and then she understood the meaning of the young lady's words. She gently bit her lower lip and said, "But young lady, aren't you on good terms with Master Ninkei? They even call each other brother and sister in private." Isn't it a little? Looking at the maidservant who wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, Dewdrop giggled and said angrily, "Do you think I'm not kind? I really don't know whether you're my maidservant or Ninkei's maidservant. He hasn't come for several months, but you still miss him so much. You don't have to worry about these things. Ninkei has been appreciated by His Majesty and has become the successor of the Divine Talisman Master. Although he can't bully anyone in Chang'an City, at least no one dares to bully him." On the table by the window of a private room on the second floor of the House of Red Sleeves, there were several refreshing snacks and 2 pots of fruit wine. A young lady sat by the window and looked at Sang Sang, who was sent out by Xiao Qiao. She said to the middle-aged guest beside her with a smile, "Do you see that little girl? That's young Master Ninkei's maidservant. All the girls in our house think that she will definitely marry Ninkei in the future. If not for this identity, how could Mistress Jian's personal maidservant be so close to her?" The middle-aged guest's eyebrows were slightly white, and his skin was like iron. He looked quite experienced. He looked out of the window following the girl's finger. After a moment of silence, he asked curiously, "This young man named Ninkei is really famous in Chang'an. But I don't understand why you all call him young Master Ninkei so smoothly. He wasn't as famous as he is today a few days ago." The girl covered her sleeves with a smile and explained softly, "Young Master Ninkei is not an ordinary person. Although the girls in our house didn't know what's unusual about him before, he must have something special about him, since he could make Dewdrop call him younger brother and make Lu Shui come specially to dance for him during her vacation." The middle-aged guest slightly raised his eyebrows and asked in surprise, "Why?" The girl thought for a while and found that all the girls in the house liked Ninquebek. But it was very difficult to sum up what was worth liking about Ninquebek. She just shook her head and said with a smile, "Mistress Jian has been treating him differently since he entered the house for the first time. Perhaps Dewdrop knows something about him? But just based on Mistress Jian's attitude, he deserves to be called young master." The middle-aged guest smiled and stopped talking about this. He drank some fruit wine with the girl and chatted for a while before leaving. Out of the House of Red Sleeves, the middle-aged man got into a carriage and instructed the coachman to walk freely in Chang'an. After a few turns, they finally stopped somewhere in the north of the city. He paid the fare and got off the carriage. Then he passed through 2 alleys and came to the back of a solemn building complex surrounded by green trees. He knocked on the back door and walked in. In the study room at the back of the Chang'an local government, Shangguan Yangyu looked at the middle-aged man in front of him and asked expressionlessly, "It took 3 months to narrow down the suspects to 7 people. Ninkei is the last one among the 7 names. Why do you suspect him? Do you have any evidence?" The middle-aged man's name was Taiying. He was the head of the Ministry of Justice in Chang'an local government. He had worked in the Ministry of Justice for more than 10 years and was very experienced in investigating cases. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "When Zhang Ichi died, Ninkei was in the House of Red Sleeves." Shangguan Yangyu's face suddenly turned cold and he scolded, "There were hundreds of people in the House of Red Sleeves at that time. Are they all suspects?" Taiying bowed his head and cupped his fist. He said in a low voice, "But I feel that there is something wrong with this person." Shangguan Yangyu frowned slightly and said unhappily, "How can you act based on your intuition when investigating a case?" Zhang Ichi died outside the side door of the House of Red Sleeves. At that time, it was not treated as a homicide case, so there was no examination at the scene and no one in the building was detained for questioning. It is really difficult to find evidence. Tai Ying continued quickly, "But if you believe in my intuition about the case, please let me continue to investigate." I have dealt with murder cases all my life. I can smell something wrong with this case just by my nose. Shangguan Yangyu seemed to be very interested. He stroked his beard and asked, "What problem do you smell?" Ning Ke was not rich before, or even a little short of money. How could such a lad enter the House of Red Sleeves? Why did Mistress Jian appreciate him? Why did the girls like him? What did he want to do in the House of Red Sleeves? I think the problem is that he should not have any relationship with the House of Red Sleeves, but he did. Taiying looked at the prefectural magistrate's disapproving look and became serious. He began to narrate another thing that he had investigated. Not long after the censor Zhang Ichi died, Huiyuantong Money House exchanged several notes for a huge amount of 2,000 taels of silver. The person who exchanged the notes was Sang Sang, Ning Ke's little handmaiden. He was not famous at that time and sold his calligraphy very cheaply. How could he have so much money? Who gave him the money? What did those people want him to do by giving him so much money? Hearing this information, Shangguan Yangyu frowned tightly. After a long silence he said, "Don't touch anything else. Check the notes first. If there is something wrong, then we can continue to investigate." Twilight shone into the Chang'an local government. Standing under the green tree in the courtyard, Shangguan Yangyu, whose face should have been glowing in the sunset, looked livid, which was not in harmony with the surrounding environment. He looked at Taiying in front of him, as if looking at the enemy who killed his father. His cold voice seeped through his teeth and seemed to be a little sharper. The notes were deposited into Huiyuantong by the Fish Dragon gang. That is to say, the 2,000 taels of silver were given to Ning Ke by Chao Xiaoshu. As for why, if you haven't forgotten the corpses lying on the street beside the Spring Breeze Pavilion that night, you may be able to guess a little. I will not forget that night, Shangguan Yangyu said coldly, because it was that night that countless big shots in the imperial court fell, and I could sit on the position of prefectural magistrate of Chang'an City. As for Chao Xiaoshu's identity, I don't think I need to remind you. Ning Ke took the 2,000 taels of silver, which is equivalent to working for the palace. Do you still insist on investigating? Taiying forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart, cupped his hands and said, "Your Excellency, there are many doubts in this matter. There was indeed a masked man beside Chao Xiaoshu at the Spring Breeze Pavilion that night, but I heard that he was a young master from the Ueluan Kingdom. As for the 2,000 taels of silver notes, whether it was to pay for the Spring Breeze Pavilion or from another source, we should carefully investigate it." Shangguan Yangyu roared angrily, "How do you want to investigate? Do you know who Ning Ke is? Even if you didn't know before, after today, everyone in Chang'an City will know that name. Evidence. If you have evidence, I will continue to investigate for the sake of His Majesty and the imperial court and the people, even if I have to sacrifice my official position. But if you want to investigate this person without any evidence and only rely on your damn intuition and rotten dog's sense of smell, then don't blame me for stripping you of your official uniform first." Taiying was hit by the reprimand and lowered his head, remaining silent. Shangguan Yangyu slightly calmed down, looked at him and lightly asked, "Have you informed the military ministry of this matter?" Taiying raised his head and nervously explained, "Since Your Excellency has ordered that this matter should be investigated secretly, of course I dare not leak it. I can guarantee that except for Your Excellency and me, there is absolutely no third person who knows that the Chang'an local government has ever suspected Ning Quebec. That's good." Shangguan Yangyu lightly touched the sparse beard on his chin and said, "Erase Ning Ke's name and investigate the other 6 people first." Taiying accepted the order and left. Shangguan Yangyu returned to the backyard and began to sit in front of the oil lamp in a daze after dinner. Suddenly he frowned, stared at the oil lamp in front of the bookshelf, and unhappily asked, "Why have 3 more lamps been lit? Quickly extinguish them for me." The prefectural magistrate's wife was sitting at the other end of the study, biting a rope and putting on shoes. Suddenly hearing her master's reprimand, she confusedly raised her head and asked, "Master, now you are also a high-ranking official in the imperial court. Why are you still like this? Is there anything wrong with the official business today?" Shangguan Yongyu was not good-looking, or even a little ugly. His temperament was extremely cunning, insidious and despicable, but he was quite good at family affairs. When he was young, he married a wife who was equally good-looking. After he became rich, he treated his wife with great love and never had the idea of taking a concubine. They got along well with each other and even did not hide many of his private affairs from his wife. After telling his wife what he had heard during the day, Shangguan Yongyu frowned and said to himself, "When I was in charge of the Ministry of Justice in Chang, and local government, the first thing I did was to poach Tai Ying from the Ministry of Justice. Because I knew that this person was experienced, and even as he said, he had a natural intuition about murder cases. Ning Ke is really related to Zhang Yiqi's death. I really don't know how to deal with this matter." Shangguan's wife slightly frowned, put down her sewing, poured a cup of hot tea for her master, and said softly, "Since you are in charge of the security of Chang, a city, and you are paid by the imperial court, you should investigate the case that should be investigated. But there is no evidence, and," Shangguan Yongyu looked at his wife and sighed sadly, "I really don't dare to investigate. His Majesty likes him, and I heard that he has entered the second floor of the academy and become the successor of the divine talisman master. Without the imperial edict, how dare I investigate such a person?" Shangguan's wife was startled and said confusedly, "If he is such a person, how could he be involved in a murder case?" Hearing this, Shangguan Yongyu's ugly triangular eyes suddenly lit up. He patted the desk and said in a low voice, "Madam, you are right. How could such a person do such a thing? Master, you can't listen to the nonsense of women like us when you are trying to solve a case." Shangguan's wife was startled by his reaction and hurriedly dissuaded him. "What if it is really him?" Shangguan Yongyu looked at the hot tea in front of him and said firmly, "There is no truth. It must not be. Even if it is not. Seaweed mixed with golden threads, 4 happiness small boxes, xianru in marinade, flour-carved drunken prawns, chicken in clear soup." Ning Ke listened to the eunuch's report and looked at the exquisite dishes on the plates. He could not help but look up at the carved beams and pillars in the hall. His eyes were swayed by the bright palace lanterns on the bronze pillars in front of him. Only then did he realize where he was and what he was doing. In the imperial study, His Majesty asked him for the calligraphy section, but was rejected by him by saying that he wanted to sell it for money. Ning Ke thought that this would definitely make the emperor angry, and he would be unlucky. However, he did not expect that although His Majesty was angry, he did not drive him out of the palace. Instead, he took him away from the imperial study, took a few turns in the garden, and came to a quiet hall, facing the sumptuous dishes. What kind of treatment was it to stay in the palace to have dinner with the Tang Emperor? The gentle and quiet Empress even personally scooped a bowl of soup for him. What kind of treatment was this? Even Ning Ke, who was used to life and death, and would not blink even if Min Mountain collapsed in front of him, finally could not help but become excited and nervous. The Empress picked up an iced bamboo shoot and put it into His Majesty's mouth. She smiled sweetly and said, "Since it is a meal, Ning Ke will have to thank and feel ashamed if old Mo says how many times he has seen the flower blooms on the shore. Otherwise, how can he have time to eat?" His Majesty was really in a good mood. He chewed the bamboo shoot with the tip of the Empress's tongue and said with a vague smile, "Then let's eat." Ning Ke held the gold-painted red lacquer bowl in his hand and began to eat. However, at this time, he had no time to taste the taste of the food. His mind kept thinking about everything he had seen. Today, he finally knew that the relationship between the Emperor and the Empress was as close as the rumors said. But who was the empty seat in front of him? There was a light sound of rings and a faint fragrance. Li Yu, the fourth princess of the Tang Empire, who was dressed in an extremely luxurious dress, came in accompanied by palace maids and old maidservants. Ning Ke was startled and his eyes subconsciously fell on her face. He noticed that her eyes and brows, which he usually thought were delicate and pretty, looked very beautiful today with the gorgeous palace makeup and gorgeous dress. He could not help but show an expression of surprise. Li Yu, who saw him in the hall, was even more surprised. She could not help but cover her mouth with her hand and asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" After returning from the academy to the palace, she had slept for a whole day to replenish her energy. At this time, she was still a little tired, and did not know about the rumors outside the palace. She also did not know that Ning Ke had entered the palace. His Majesty looked at the two and asked in confusion, "Little Yu, you know him?" Li Yu quickly calmed down and explained with a smile, "Father, Ning Ke was the one who escorted me back from the grassland last year. We knew each other then. Last night, when I went to the academy to watch the opening ceremony of the second floor, I saw him." The journey from the grassland had started from the Golden Tribe, passed through the city of Wei, and fought their way through the North Mountain Pass before finally arriving in Chang'an. His Majesty was very clear about the difficulties his daughter had suffered. But he did not know that on this journey, there was a border town soldier named Ning Ke who had saved his daughter's life until today. Hearing Li Yu use the shortest words to describe last year's journey, the way the Emperor looked at Ning Ke was different from before. It was no longer pure admiration, but more sincere fondness. Li Yu smiled and asked, "Father, why are you interested in seeing Ning Ke today?" "I think it's not because of the opening of the second floor. I have mentioned to you that there is a piece of wonderful calligraphy in the imperial study." His Majesty looked at his daughter and said with a happy smile, "Did you know that Ning Ke was the one who wrote "The flower blooms on the shore of heaven"? Everyone in the imperial court admires your ability to read people. But since you know him, you did not know that he had such an ability. It seems that those words were not true. I just did not want to have a talent, so I searched everywhere for talent for father and the imperial court. I do not have any real foresight." Li Yu lifted her skirt and slowly sat down by the table with the help of the palace maid. She looked at Ning Ke opposite her with a faint smile and said, "As for Ning Ke's good handwriting, I know that he is good, but I did not know that he is so good. But speaking of which, this guy is best at hiding his strength and pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. I do not know where he learned such boring tricks." There was a deeper meaning in her words. Ning Ke did not know how to answer, so he buried his head in his food and pretended not to hear. Since he had to pretend to be a pig, he had to be a competent pig. But listening to the Emperor and Empress's laughter, and looking at Li Yu's teasing gaze, he felt that the imperial banquet did not have the solemnity of an imperial banquet. It was more like an ordinary family's dinner. More importantly, it was impossible to really have green onions and pancakes in this imperial banquet. But these seemingly exquisite dishes were not delicious even for a pig. Ning Ke used his chopsticks to play with the light and tasteless marinade. After suspecting that the imperial chef had a fake new Oriental certificate, he began to miss the leftovers in the old brush pen shop on Lin 47th Street, and even the pot of sour chicken soup. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.